Chapter 146. Stop them. Kirk knew that these fellows' target was the manor. It would be troublesome if they were allowed to approach the manor. The situation at the manor was unclear to begin with, and adding these flying fishes to the mix would make things even worse. The shoals of fish in the sea could not come ashore, so they would not pose much of a threat to the manor no matter what they did. That was why Kirk was prepared to mobilize the defense team in the sea and shift their target. Who knew that Kirk would still underestimate the threat of these sea creatures? Boss, the sea snakes. Kirk was about to give an order to the underwater team when he was stopped by his subordinate's voice beside him. He looked at the display. Some of the sea snakes dodged the shots with their agility and slender bodies and began to come ashore. Kirk's heart turned cold just by looking at the patterns on the sea snakes' bodies. The venom that the sea snakes spat out was very corrosive, and this undoubtedly increased the difficulty of the defense battle. His subordinate also told him that there were some larger sea snakes and other terrestrial sea creatures in the sea. Kirk felt suffocated all over. This kind of restricted battle was so goddamn depressing. Fortunately, he had many years of experience. After Kirk quickly cooled down, he issued one order after another. A group of people retreated to the coast and targeted the sea creatures that came ashore. A group of people attacked the flying fishes in the air. The people protecting Warsaw were not allowed to move. While Kirk and Costello were busy, Sillin patted Huemao's head and said, "Pay attention to those flying fishes. I think that the tamer is on one of them." The people outside the manor did not have the time to catch their breath. If it wasn't for their higher gene rank, they would have died a long time ago. The people inside the manor were even more on guard. They did not expect to face such a great war of mere people. Fortunately, fish were fish. They could not fly as nimbly as birds, and they could not fly too high either. Therefore, it was relatively easy to hit them. The manpower the Feniers family had mobilized from other parts of Sector H could not arrive immediately. Therefore, they could drag things out for as long as they could, and it would be better when they had sufficient manpower. The protective shield around the manor had been raised when the flying fishes appeared. However, it did not take long before they realized that there was a problem with the shield. The repair crews found some shrimp and crab corpses at the problematic spots. They had obviously died from touching high-energy circuits. It turned out that the main target of the missing seafood that was supposed to be a dish on the dining table was not Tobo, but the shield. Costello, who was watching everything from inside the manor, now truly felt the powerful influence of a trainer. With just his own strength, he could make all the marine creatures on the entire planet go crazy. The entire planet? Suddenly, Costello shuddered. No. It was impossible that there was only one trainer. If a single tamer could command so many shoals of fish in so many places at the same time, then it would be way too heaven-defying. If the ancient tamer could achieve such an effect on his own, then there was no way he would have fallen from Sector H. The information Costello received stated that the coastal areas were being attacked by shoals of fish. The shoals of fish control covered almost all of the important coastal areas of the entire planet. Otherwise, they would have been able to mobilize manpower. Although Warsaw said that the Vezin family only had one ancient tamer, but what if they actually had more than one ancient tamer? There should be more than one ancient tamer controlling shoals of fish in so many areas. But why did they only target this place? Although the Feniers family's young master Tobo, the Feniers family's Sector H CEO Kirk, and the Binger family's people were all at the manor was just a private residence. The other places on land were the real management hub zones that were in charge of Sector H's business. If those zones were destroyed, then the management of Sector H would run into trouble. If they wanted to attack the Feniers family's businesses in Sector H, then attacking those places would definitely bring them a lot of benefits. However, if there really was more than one ancient tamer, then why did they show mercy at the other places and only delay the reinforcements? What a contradiction. Costello knew that now was not the time to think about this, but once he had started, he could not help but think even more. Costello felt the temperature of the blood in his body grow much colder. Which other family was involved in this? If there really was a fourth family that had interfered, then the situation would not be so optimistic. However, from the looks of it, this fourth family's attitude was a little too ambiguous. Not only did they help the Vezin family attack the Fenier's family situation here, but they did not go too far, and their stance was not absolute. According to Costella's understanding of the families that had grudges with the Fenier's family, this shouldn't be the case. After Silen's reminder, Huimao had been paying attention to the flying fish in the air. Slowly, he fixed his eyes on one. Silen, it's that one. When Huimao spoke, Silen had obviously noticed it as well. He looked at the flying fish that was pretending to be hit and falling from the sky, and patted Huimao. Come, let's go see the legendary tamer. Silen and Huimao immediately jumped out of the window. The surveillance personnel reported Silen's situation to Costella, and Costella sent a few people to follow them. He knew that with Silen's abilities as the vice commander of AB Squadron, he must have discovered something, and something crucial at that. The flying fish that had pretended to be shot down landed near the manor's garden with its belly facing up. It was mixed in with the other flying fish that had been shot down, and it did not look very eye-catching. However, not long after it landed, a sticky substance gushed out from the part of its back that was in contact with the ground. The color was very similar to the color of the flying fish's back, and since it was stuck to the flying fish's back, the flying fish could not easily notice the abnormality of this flying fish when it was flying in the air. Under the cover of the many flying fish's corpses, the sticky substance slowly moved towards the manor. Silen did not act immediately. Instead, he pulled back the people Costella had sent to follow behind him. They were not too surprised that Silen had discovered that they were tailing them, and they were not embarrassed either. However, Silen's words had indeed shocked them. Silen pointed in a direction and said, "The tamer is over there, but you guys need to notify Costella first. Many of the flying fish that have fallen to the ground are still able to move. Send someone to finish them off." Many of the flying fish that had fallen to the ground were indeed heavily injured, and they looked like they were covered in blood. However, they were still alive, and if one were to examine them with a life detector, they would discover that a third of the flying fish that had fallen to the ground were still alive. If the tamer used them again before they were completely dead, then the manor would probably receive quite a bit of damage. Just like a decapitated snake, even if it was just a snake's head, it could still attack due to its nervous inertia. These people naturally knew about these things, and after hearing Silen's explanation, they immediately reported it to Costella. When Costella heard about it, he immediately sent someone to take action. These were all matters related to the Fenier's family. The reason why Silen was interested in the tamer was not just because of his miraculous ability to control sea creatures, but also because of these flying fish. Silen had never seen this kind of flying fish in some of the books regarding the special species of fishes in Sector H. Silen suspected that the tamer or the Vezin family had secretly bred them through genetic modification. The sticky substance seemed to realize that it had been discovered, so it condensed into a human form and revealed its true appearance. It was only in its human form that it could move more nimbly. A shapeshifter. That tamer was actually an extremely rare shapeshifter. Now that they had finally discovered the tamer's tracks, it was only natural that the Fenier's family would expend a great amount of manpower to deal with him. While the Fenier's family was fighting the tamer, Silen and Huimao continued to gather information nearby. Silen discovered that he felt a sense of familiarity from this tamer. Chapter 147. The tamer controlled the undead flying fishes on the ground and other flying fishes to attack the manor, but before that, Costella and Kirk had already finished their preparations. Although there was a problem with the manor's protective shield and it couldn't be activated, the tamer couldn't do anything to the manor for the time being. The repairmen in charge of repairing the protective shield estimated that it would take around 10 minutes, and the reinforcements from the Fenier's family from other planets would also arrive around 10 to 15 minutes later. Therefore, if the tamer still didn't make any progress within these 10 minutes, then he wouldn't stand a chance anymore. Firing photon bullets and alloy bullets hit the flying fishes densely, be it flying in the sky or struggling on the ground. Unless these flying fishes were completely dead, the Fenrir's family would never stop attacking them. The counterattack of the dying flying fishes would also cause trouble for the defenders, so it was necessary to eliminate any future threats. Castella stood in one of the rooms in the manor and watched the situation. He silently read the reports from his subordinates. Castella didn't need to personally command the battle. He only needed to give a general direction of deployment and leave the rest to the guards and bodyguards in charge. These people were talents that the Fenrir's family had painstakingly trained, so they couldn't possibly need Castella's instructions for every battle. The guards certainly cooperated well. At the critical moment, the advantage of the talents nurtured by the great families was revealed. If it were the guards of planet Brown Earth instead, it would definitely be a mess. Because the tamer was a shapeshifter, normal metal bullets and cold weapons had no real effect on him. The Fenrir's family guards had chosen some firing energy weapons. To avoid affecting Warsaw's control, they didn't even use any high-energy density weapons. However, judging from the current situation, 10 minutes was something they could hold on for. This tamer didn't expect the other party to discover him so quickly. The entire plan should have been perfect, but first, the Echo Conchas were discovered ahead of time. Then, Mermaid Princess Warsaw, who possessed the bloodline of the new Europeans, came to hold back those giant deep-sea beasts. There was no progress on Tobo's side either. Even if the tamer could control tens of thousands of fishes, his helpers on land were indeed limited. The sea snakes, prawns, and crabs that had come ashore were blocked by a group of Fenrir's family members, so they couldn't help the tamer. Knowing that he wouldn't have the slightest chance if this dragged on, the tamer began to grow impatient. "Strange wave spectrum," said Hui Mao, who was squatting nearby and collecting information. Sillin had also vaguely sensed the spectrum, but right now Sillin was paying more attention to the strange sense of familiarity he felt. Celine was sure that he did not know this trainer, but this trainer did give him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. It was just that Celine could not put a finger on this sense of familiarity. This sense of familiarity was real, and not an illusion. Sillin was willing to bet that he had met someone who gave him a similar feeling before. The strange thing was that Sillin's memory was clearly very good, but he couldn't capture this feeling at all. It was like a hazy dot of light flashing and disappearing again and again. He always felt that he could catch it with a raise of his hand, but when he opened his palm, he discovered that there was nothing there. What gave Sillin a sense of familiarity was not the strange spectrum, nor was it the tamer's shape-shifting human race. It was the faint aura the tamer produced. Just where had he seen a similar aura before? Since he couldn't grasp that fleeting feeling, Sillin tossed it aside for now and observed the tamer carefully. However, the more he looked, the stranger Sillin felt. Based on the tamer's current situation, Sillin believed that the tamer wasn't holding back. Otherwise, he would have been poked into a sieve a long time ago. But if the ability this tamer was displaying right now was his peak ability, then it would be strange. Based on the wave spectrum information that Hui Mao transmitted to him, as well as the tamer's aura that Sillin had collected himself, as well as the frequency of changes in the micromagnetic field, through multiple calculations and matrix analysis, the limit of the tamer's field of effect wasn't as wide as he had imagined. The current situation was that in the area outside of the field Sillin had calculated, the shoals of fish were still being controlled to attack the Fenrir's family's firepower distribution in a planned and organized manner. In other words, there was still a tamer controlling the shoals of fish in the vicinity, at least in the coastal area. If others knew that Sillin could calculate such a complicated equation in such a short amount of time with just his human brain, they would definitely be shocked to the core. Because a human brain like this was already comparable to a machine. "Wheeze, there's another tamer in the vicinity," Sillin said to Hui Mao, who was beside him. Since Hui Mao could absorb the wave spectrum, he naturally noticed that something was off. After hearing Sillin's words, he changed his direction to search for the other tamer hidden in the vicinity. There were too many disturbances, and the scan was severely affected. Moreover, when Hui Mao used the information of this tamer as a reference to search for the other tamer, he discovered that there was no similar target. He adjusted the parameters to set the general human and the other types of people that Hui Mao had encountered before, and performed a cross-analysis. However, there was still no target within the predicted range. In other words, the hidden tamer might be a race that Hui Mao had never encountered before. It could not be helped. Hui Mao used to live on the original hunting planet, and he had seen very few people. He had only seen more after following the two hunters. However, compared to the other hunters in the sixth team, Hui Mao still had not seen many races. His known data was limited, and it was no wonder that Hui Mao often encountered obstacles. Of course, Hui Mao was also looking forward to seeing more races and other creatures in the future. I can't find it. The information I have collected is too little. I can't compare it, Hui Mao sighed in frustration. Sillin looked at the situation around him and the sea. He thought for a moment and asked Hui Mao, "Can you capture the wave spectrum of each area? Including those in the air, on land, and on the sea?" Sillin was not good at analyzing the wave spectrum of the farther areas, so he could only rely on Hui Mao. "Yes, I can." Hui Mao was absolutely confident in this. "That's good. You don't have to list the race parameters of the shapeshifters to compare. According to the wave spectrum of each area and the changes in the micromagnetic field, use cross-elimination to find the guy's location." After listening to Sillin, Hui Mao began his second search. Since Hui Mao and Sillin were next to each other, Hui Mao could share some information with Sillin. If this chaotic area was placed on a map, then every time Hui Mao calculated a data, a colored area would shrink. After a few calculations, the colored area that was originally overlapping with the entire map had shrunk a lot. 10 seconds later, Hui Mao and Sillin were shocked at the same time. Found it. On the analysis map that Hui Mao had drawn up, there was a colored spot in the coastal area quietly hovering there. Sillin and Hui Mao quickly rushed over there. Although Sillin and the gray cat had concealed themselves very well, the tamer was obviously extremely vigilant. After realizing that he had been exposed, he swam towards the distant sea with a whoosh. The place where he was previously at, because of the instantaneous force, formed a vacuum area and then a whirlpool. It was obvious that the force was strong. Looking at the guy who rushed out like a cannonball underwater, Sillin and Hui Mao cursed in their hearts at the same time. Damn, tamers are not normal people. Chapter 148. Sillin and Hui Mao both charged into the sea to chase after the tamer. Although they had only seen a brief glimpse of the tamer's back, both Sillin and Hui Mao knew that it wasn't an average human. What average human would grow a few tentacles? And that tamer's speed was like a fish that lived in the sea to begin with. He wasn't any slower than those black marlin fish from before. Since the tamer had fled far out into the sea after realizing that he had been exposed, he no longer cared about those shoals of fish. Therefore, the shoals of fish that had lost control in the coastal region were instantly thrown into chaos. The shoals of fish began attacking each other without the Fenrir's family needing to do anything. Thousands upon thousands of fish of different species and factions began attacking one another. For a time, a shoal war broke out in the coastal region. After the men Castella had sent to keep an eye on Sillin and Hui Mao reported Sillin's actions, and combined with the chaos in the shoals of fish in the coastal region, Castella guessed that Sillin must have discovered the hidden tamer. He ordered his men to follow behind and pay attention to their whereabouts, but not to act rashly. Kirk ordered some of the men who were stopping the shoals of fish in the coastal region to stop what they were doing and shift their target to the coast to assist in capturing that tamer. After all, the flying fish there were still controlled by that shape-shifting tamer, and the tamer was the key. Sillin and Hui Mao chased closely after the figure in front of them, but due to the other's physical advantage, they couldn't close the distance in a short amount of time. What surprised Sillin was that the tamer was fleeing in the direction of the giant deep-sea beasts. Above the surface of the sea, Warsaw was still struggling to hold on. Looking at the dark mass of gigantic figures before him, Sillin thought to himself, what is this tamer trying to do? Very soon, Sillin found out why. As the tamer approached, the sea beasts that Warsaw had calmed down began to stir. On the aircraft above the sea, Warsaw's voice suddenly cut off. She took 2 steps back with a pale face, barely managing to steady herself by holding onto the handle next to her. Seeing Warsaw in such a state, the members of the Binger family immediately came forward to support Warsaw, handing her a cup of specially concocted liquid. Warsaw's breathing stabilized after drinking it, but beads of sweat continued to pour from her pale face. Warsaw was almost at her limit after holding on for such a long time. Now that the trainer had suddenly rushed over, she finally could not hold on any longer. After getting someone to take the communicator and connect to Kirk, Warsaw said hurriedly with an unstable breath, "I'm sorry, I can't hold on any longer, a trainer has affected them, I can't hold them back now, Mr. Kirk, you have to respond immediately." Just now, Warsaw discovered that the originally stable sound wave pacification was suddenly cut off at one of the points by an abnormal wave band, which also caused the sea beast corresponding to that point to become restless. If Warsaw was at her peak, she would have been able to handle it, but now it was difficult for her to even speak. If there was one, there would be another. The chain effect caused the other sea beasts to break out of their quiet state one by one. Hua Sha could no longer suppress them now. It looked like today's matter was not going to end well. The area where the dissolved oxygen had decreased was slowly recovering under the effect of some instruments, and the fish in other areas were also gradually moving towards that direction. The ocean was huge after all, and although the tamers had controlled a portion of the shoals, this portion of the shoal was just a small corner of the entire ocean. It would be much easier if they could lure these deep-sea beasts to the distant sea, but the problem was that these deep-sea beasts seemed to have set their sights on this area of the ocean. If they were to come any closer, Kirk would definitely order his men to activate the weapons of mass destruction. As a person who grew up in Sector H and possessed the blood of European immigrants, Warsaw did not wish to see such a scene. But it was one thing to not wish for it, and what else could she do now? Warsaw ordered her men to fly the spaceplane higher, in case the sea beasts suddenly attacked from below. Back to the topic, Sillin was chasing after the tamer in front of him. After a slight ripple, Huimao shouted, "That guy is controlling the sea beasts." The tamer's figure swiftly passed through the gaps between the giant bodies, and after he passed through, the sea beasts there immediately moved their bodies and blocked the original gap. Sillin had no choice but to find another gap. To these giant sea beasts, a trainer could only be effective at close range, and there could only be one target. Moreover, the trainer could not completely control the sea beasts. He could only create a tendency to make the sea beasts think that way at that moment. Therefore, this kind of control might not be 100% effective for a tamer, but if one of them worked, then it would be an opportunity. Just like the time just now, the sea beasts did not react much when he passed through the gaps earlier, but it worked when he passed through this gap. The sea beasts moved according to the tamer's set thought tendency and blocked off Sillin's pursuit route. If Sillin were to find another gap to chase after them, then he would waste a certain amount of time. On the other hand, the tamer would be able to run further and widen the distance between them. These sea beasts did not pay attention to Sillin and Huimao. As the overlord of a certain domain in the deep sea, their tempers were not very good. Previously when they gathered here, everyone had nothing to do with each other and did not fight for the time being. Or perhaps before they started fighting, Warsaw appeared. But now, Warsaw no longer had the ability to persevere and pacify them. In addition, the tamer had the intention to anger these sea beasts. As long as one of the deep-sea giant beasts was successfully angered and attacked the other sea beasts, the waves raised by the angry deep-sea giant beasts could form a tsunami and engulf the manor over there. More than 10 deep-sea giant beasts, after the commotion, some half emerged from the surface of the sea, revealing their mountain-like dorsal fins. Some looked like multi-legged sea beasts, flinging their thick and long tentacles out of the sea. The surface of the sea was set off by waves. The shoals of fish in the coastal area were either dead or scattered. The tamer had also been captured. Without the tamer's control, those sea beasts would not attack in an organized manner now. They could not even escape. Kirk withdrew his men and ordered, if those big fellows cross the coastal area's warning line, attack immediately. Before the men sent by Castella to tail Sillin could approach the area, the sea beasts had already gone berserk. It could not be helped. They could only keep a distance away and make plans later. Hui Mao, who was chasing after the tamer with Silen, was carelessly whipped by the thick tentacles of a large sea beast next to him. He was flung far away and rolled far away like a spinning top. Meow my ass. Silen, you go after them first. I'm going to teach this blind fellow a lesson, said Hui Mao, who had swam back in the blink of an eye. Before this, Hui Mao had always felt that he was putting business first. But now that he was being whipped, how could he not be angry? Don't let them get close to the coastal area. Chiu is still in the manor. If there's a way, lure these big fellows to the distant sea. Silen knew that Hui Mao had a sense of propriety, so he did not say much. The tamer in front ran further and further away. Chapter 149. The collisions between the giant beasts created waves that crashed against the shore, scraping away layer after layer of sand and rocks. Kirk was glad that those giant beasts weren't close to the coastal area. If they were, even the manor would be drowned. The roars of the giant beasts were either as deep as thunder or as sharp as a whistle. The roars of the giant beasts caused the people on the shore to feel apprehensive. Just the sound alone was enough to bring about such enormous pressure. This was the difference between the giant beasts of the deep sea and the other fish species. Even that large school of fish could not remain intact under such a loud roar. However, that was only for the other schools of fish and humans. For Hui Mao, it was a completely different story. They were really too arrogant. Hui Mao thought to himself, these fellows are simply too arrogant. No, they don't even have cats in their eyes. Hui Mao didn't transform. His body was still in the form of a kitten, but long knife claws had grown out of his paws. Ordinary knives or guns couldn't pose a threat to these big fellows, but there really weren't many beasts that could remain unscathed under Hui Mao's claws. The sickle-like knife claws sliced through the surface of the giant beast's body, but because the skin was too thick, the insides weren't harmed. Hui Mao narrowed his eyes, and the knife claws on his paws grew even longer. Compared to the 8 knife claws, Hui Mao's tiny body looked a lot smaller. From a certain angle, one really couldn't see Hui Mao. All one could see were the 8 large knife claws waving about. When the skin was finally cut open, the pain transmitted by the nerves in the injured area stimulated the giant beasts. The collisions and attacks became even more intense, and what followed were even bigger waves and all kinds of roars that resounded throughout the world. The fish that didn't manage to escape in time had their internal organs shattered and died. There weren't any other living fish in the vast area of the sea around them. The members of the Feniers family and the Binger family had all retreated to the shore and activated their soundwave defense mechanism. Another thing that was worth rejoicing over was that the manor's protective barrier had been repaired a few minutes earlier. The activated protective barrier was able to resist the soundwave attacks of the sea beasts to a great extent. Although the sound wave attack had been reduced, the people in the manor could still clearly hear those terrifying roars, which made their hearts tremble. Every hair on their bodies trembled along with those roars. Compared to Tobo, Emma, and Rost, Tang Kakikiu was much calmer. She was still playing her game with a lollipop in her mouth, which made Tobo and the other 2 look at her strangely. All the monitoring devices in the coastal waters had been disrupted and had lost their functions. Costella and Kirk had no way of knowing what kind of battle was taking place there. One by one, the sea beasts were scratched by Hui Mao, and the number of wounds continued to increase. The roars of the sea beasts became louder and louder, and their movements became more and more frenzied. Their limbs were bitten off, their fins were torn off, and their scales were ripped off. It was a shocking sight to behold. Yell, yell my ass. So noisy. The gray cat was in a bad mood to begin with, so much so that even its whiskers were standing on end. Quarrel my ass. Hui Mao opened his mouth. Amidst the cacophony of roars, a single beast's roar seemed to suppress all other sounds. The bodies of the sea beasts in close proximity were shattered by the tremor, and the monitoring devices in the coastal waters that had lost their functions due to the interference were all shattered into smithereens. At the coastal areas, the people who stayed on land were knocked unconscious by the tremor. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, every control panel malfunctioned, the dashboard and the monitoring panel exploded, and the aircraft was forced to land on the ground. Inside the manor, all the electronic panel screens were in a blurry state, and more than half of the electromagnetic devices were almost paralyzed. This was even after Huimao recalled Silen's words and restrained himself a little. If he had gone all out, none of the equipment in the manor would have survived. What on earth happened? That was what the people on the shore were thinking, and it was also the reason why they were restless and emotionally unstable. Ever since they arrived on planet Zafia, they had never encountered such a situation. Warsaw and the other European newbies felt a wave of pressure, and the captured tamer was almost in a daze right now. Warsaw and the tamer, who were familiar with the giant deep-sea beasts, knew that the abilities of the giant deep-sea beasts on this planet should not have reached such a level. Although such a behemoth was also the ruler of the deep sea on this planet, if they were to be compared to the few rank B planets in Sector H whose habitability was almost entirely ocean, then the giant deep-sea beasts of planet Zafia could only be considered as minions that went through the motions. Moreover, the owner of the voice that paralyzed the electromagnetic system definitely had abilities that rivaled those true overlords. At first, Huimao wanted to forcefully chase these fellows to the distant sea, but he didn't expect that after a moment of venting his anger, these big fellows would obediently slip away to the distant sea as if they had seen their natural enemy. For these big fellows, their old territory was the only place that gave them a sense of security. That was why they were returning to their respective places now. Watching the big sea beasts dragging their maimed bodies and slipping away, Huimao shook his ears and withdrew his claws. Seeing that no one was sent over from the shore, he swam towards the distant sea as well. He was going to find Silen, who was chasing after the tamer. Speaking of which, Silen had chased after the tamer for a while. At first, the distance between the two parties didn't close by much, and the tamer didn't manage to shake off Silen either. Then, the tamer's stamina slowly decreased. Chasing the shoals had already used up a portion of his strength, and now that he was running away with all his might, his stamina was gradually running out. However, just as Silen was closing the distance between the two parties, a few sharp thorns suddenly shot towards him from the front. They actually have companions. As I thought, there are more than two tamers. Silen evaded the sharp thorns, but what followed were rounds and rounds of attacks. There was also the shoal of black marlin that swam towards him at high speed, as well as other fish that were faster than him. The large shoal of fish obstructed Silen's path of pursuit. By the time Silen broke through the shoal of fish, the tamer was already gone. Silen didn't continue his pursuit. Since another tamer had appeared, then there might be a fourth, a fifth, or even more. For so many tamers that were regarded as rare antiques to appear all of a sudden, just who did the Fenier's family offend? Regardless of who the Fenier's family had offended, Silen didn't want to investigate any further. The current situation was one where he was alone. Since the other party was able to mobilize so many tamers, then their hidden strength was definitely not limited to this. No matter what, this was a matter between the Fenier's family and the Binger family. Silen didn't want to poke his nose into other people's business. The twists and turns between the great families were too complicated. Previously, he was too curious about the tamers, and it was fortunate that he had encountered one. If he could capture one and exchange it with the Fenier's family, then it seemed that he should stop now. Silen knew his own limits. It was obvious that the other party was prepared. If he continued to investigate further, not only would he not be able to resist them with his individual strength, he might even suffer a great loss. He turned around and decisively swam back. He didn't swim far before Silen bumped into Huimao, who was chasing after him. Huimao looked at Silen and didn't see the tamer. You lost him. He has companions to receive him. There's nothing we can do. Silen surfaced and looked at the sky. It seemed to be getting late. Let's go back to the manor. All right, let's go back. Those big fellows have all run away. I only roared once. Huimao snorted. He could hear the smugness in his voice. Don't be so arrogant. Have you been discovered? Of course not. Because of the battle between the giant beasts, there was no one in the sea at that time. They had all escaped to the shore. Moreover, all the surveillance cameras in the surroundings have been destroyed. With those big fellows acting as cover, there's no way we would have been discovered. Hui Mao said with certainty. That's good. Let's go back. While you're at it, think of a way to extort more money from that old fox, Castella. Of course. We have to ask for more compensation no matter what. Oh right, I saw that there's dried fish on the manor's dining table. I'll ask for more when we get back to the manor. Extort more money when the opportunity presented itself. This was the philosophy that Diaz had instilled in him. In fact, before Silan could even open his mouth, Castella had already taken the initiative to express that he would increase the reward. Silan's contribution in capturing the Vezin family's shapeshifter tamer could not go unnoticed, even if Silan did not participate in the capture. Other than that, although Silan did not manage to capture another tamer, he had at least obtained one piece of information. There were at least 3 tamers involved in this operation, and there might even be more. After this ruckus, Castella, Kirk, and the others still had many things to handle. Warsaw and the others, on the other hand, were conflicted about which type of deep-sea giant beast had let out that absolutely oppressive roar at the end. Everyone was very busy. However, Silan could not care less. After he received the receipt signed by Castella, he returned to his room. He had overused his brain today. Let's take a nap first. Tang Qiuqiu was still at her post, but there was not much for her to do at the moment. The bodyguards around her were keeping a close eye on Tobo. On the other side of planet Zafia, on the surface of the sea that no one had noticed, a few figures were gathered there. One of them was the tamer that Silan had been pursuing. These people were scattered all over the place, commanding shoals of fish to attack the coastal areas and the Fenier's family's underwater base. They held back the others so that they could not provide reinforcements to the manor. Warsaw and Castella would never have imagined that there would be so many tamers hidden on this planet. Vezin's men failed. If they failed, so be it. We've already expected it. Do they think they can turn the tables with trash like them? Yeah, it's fine as long as our mission is completed. Have you finished processing the mission summary? If you're done, hand it over. I have to report to the master as soon as possible. Ouch, my kidneys are hurting. Another mission summary report. I hate this stuff. My nerve endings are slow to react to this. It's fine. You can keep delaying it. Pfft. I don't want to be stripped by the master and thrown into an aquarium for people to see. These people were obviously not from the Vezin family. It was just as Castella had thought. There was indeed a fourth force involved. However, who was the master these people were talking about? Chapter 150. In Sector H's Sector A, there was a planet more than 5 times larger than planet Zafia, planet Auroch. In Sector H's sector language, Auroch meant eternal. 50% of the planet's surface was made up of ocean, its habitability was at rank A, and its terrestrial environment was extremely good. Planet Auroch was also the capital of Sector H, and it controlled the politics, business, education, media and so on of Sector H. The great families all had branches there. It was obvious how important the planet was in Sector H. In a certain 1,000-meter-tall tower in one of the cities on planet Auroch. The height of this tower really wasn't much on this planet. There were a lot of buildings taller than this tower in the city cluster, but no one on this planet would ignore this tower. In fact, this not-so-great tower definitely ranked in the top 3 in terms of influence on the entire planet Auroch. The tower took up a lot of space, and it looked very grand. From time to time, flying cars, transport planes, and so on would stop and go here. It was a busy sight. Right now, inside a certain upper floor of this tower, a little old man, who was less than 160 centimeters tall, with a head full of gray hair that was combed into a thin braid at the back of his head, walked forward calmly, step by step, with his hands clasped behind his back. There was a door in front of him and there were a few guards by the door. They were fooling around there. When they saw the little old man, the few of them immediately retracted their smiles and stood at attention. Their previously smiling faces tightened into a look of paralysis. The aura around them also quickly changed from the casual attitude they had earlier to one of solemnity. "Is the young master inside?" the little old man asked. The little old man's tone was calm, and one could even feel the friendliness and casualness in it. However, the guards at the door did not look relaxed at all. They still stood as straight as before, and faintly exuded an intimidating aura. "Yes, the young master is taking an afternoon nap," one of them answered in a sonorous and forceful voice. The little old man looked at the color of the sky outside. "It's almost evening now, isn't it? An afternoon nap?" However, the little old man did not dwell on this issue. He looked at the few people whose muscles were stretched taut, and his eyes swept over them from top to bottom like a scanner, as if he could see inside. The shape of your facial muscles is very well tightened. Make your eyes sharper and adjust your posture slightly. You can't be stiff. Good, very good. In the future, when someone comes over, you should maintain this posture. Be full of vigor and pull up some superficial points. If you continue to follow young master like that, all your superficial points will be deducted. Also, take out the things in your pockets. The suit isn't for you to keep snacks in. One had to know that one's salary was directly proportional to their points. The more points they deducted, the less their salary would be. When they heard this, their gazes became even sharper. After all, it was this little old man who was paying the salary. The little old man nodded in satisfaction. After entering the password and verification information, he pushed the door open and walked in. After the little old man went in, the few people outside the door resumed their previous playful state. However, they still listened to the little old man's words and took out the snacks in their pockets and placed them in a cabinet not far away. It was a spacious office. Upon entering, one could see a large office desk, bookshelves, a filing desk, and a floor-to-ceiling aquarium next to it. Inside, there were all kinds of strange-looking fish swimming around, adding quite a bit of liveliness to the office. The little old man did not even look at the situation inside the office and walked straight to a small door at the side of the office. There was a resting room there. Unlike the resting rooms in other offices, this resting room was very large, even larger than the offices outside. There were wine cabinets, a bar counter, video cameras, game consoles, storage cabinets, and more. There was even a large bed. It was obvious that the owner of this place was someone who knew how to enjoy life. However, the most eye-catching thing in this resting room was definitely the sofa. It was a shell-shaped sofa, a sofa that had been hollowed out and then processed. The value of this sofa alone was comparable to that of a spaceship. If a beautiful woman was lying inside this shell-shaped sofa, it would naturally be more aesthetically pleasing. However, the truth was that it was a man lying on it, and this man was wearing a singlet. His hair was messy like a chicken's nest, and he was wearing large underpants. There was even a slipper with a suspicious substance stuck to his foot. He was napping on the high-end shell-shaped sofa without any sleeping posture to speak of. His saliva flowed along the soft cushion of the sofa all the way to the floor, forming a large puddle. The little old man was already used to the situation in front of him. He was even satisfied that this person was not snoring today. However, when his gaze fell on the slipper hanging from this person's foot, his eyebrows could not help but twitch. He remembered that he had just thrown this pair of slippers into the sea hundreds of kilometers away yesterday. Shaking his head with a bitter smile, the little old man walked over. He did not call out, but instead pressed a button on the shell cover of the shell-shaped sofa. Paw! The two petal-like shells of the shell-shaped sofa that were originally open suddenly closed, but due to the irregular sleeping posture of the person on the sofa, the legs and one arm that were resting on the edge of the sofa were clamped. If it was a normal person, they would have been clamped into several pieces. However, the person on the sofa was still perfectly fine and did not react at all. Pressing again, the shell opened and closed again. Still no reaction. Pressing again. Pressing again. It was not until the 10th time that the person on the sofa finally moved. Only then did the little old man retract his finger from the button. The person on the sofa slowly sat up, blinked in confusion, scratched his hair that was like a chicken's nest, wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand, and wiped it on his singlet. His gaze turned to the little old man, and when he saw who it was, he curled his lips and raised his foot to kick a button next to the sofa. Other people used their hands to press the button, but this young master habitually kicked it with his foot. Because his legs were longer than his arms, it saved him a lot of trouble. He did not need to move his butt within a short distance, so he was too lazy to even move a single step. Warm soup, freshly roasted meat products, and mineral nutrient solution that had already been poured into a cup were placed neatly on a plate by the robot and brought to the dining table that had popped up in front of the sofa. Looking at the person who raised his hand lazily to pick up the cutlery to eat, the little old man did not make a sound, because he knew that this young master would want to eat once he woke up. If they were to talk before he finished eating, he would toss out one word after another, not bothering to remember anything that was said. After he finished eating, this young master raised his eyelids to look at the person who had come. What is it now? The people from planet Zafia sent news that Vision's men failed. There's no need to say anything about it. The person on the sofa put down the cup and looked at the little old man. I say, Mr. Burzett, can I call you Bear Grylls? You woke me up from my sweet dreams just because of this. I don't deserve to be called Bear Grylls. The old man will throw me into the deep sea to feed the giant beasts. Burzett laughed, but then he withdrew his smile. Pescado has been discovered, and the others are also inclined to be exposed. At the very least, Fenir's men already know that a fourth force has intervened. Of course, they don't know that it's our side. Oh. The person on the sofa spun his wine cup. This is unexpected. To think that Pescado would be exposed with his abilities. The name Pescado meant swimming fish in the sector language of Sector H. When Pescado was hidden in a shoal of fish, even a scanner would have a hard time distinguishing him from the shoal of fish. If Costella and Kirk had guessed that there was another tamer after the fact, then it wouldn't be strange. After all, neither of them were simple characters, and they would be able to figure it out after a careful analysis. But the problem was that Pescado had been discovered, and his early exposure had disrupted some of their original plans. Do you want them to return? The little old man asked. Of course. Since they were discovered so quickly, there's not much use for them to stay on planet Zafia. Cancel the follow-up operations and let them return. All right. After a pause, Burzett said again, according to the information they sent back and the mission summary report, the one who discovered Pescado wasn't a member of the Fenir's family, but a young man called Silen, the person who was originally lying lazily on the sofa and listening to Burzett's report spat out a mouthful of water. He was so excited that he kicked over the dining table in front of him. After a series of clanking sounds, the person ignored the stains splashed on his body and jumped off the sofa. He ran in front of Burzett and looked him straight in the eye. He said almost word by word, "Tell me again. What is the name of the person who discovered Pescado?" Young master, according to the information we received, his name is Silen, and he's about 20 years old. Fuck his grandpa. Young master Lung, please pay attention to your manners. Burzett had no choice but to remind him. However, it seemed like how long had it been since his young master had cursed like this ever since he took over the work here. That's right, this person wearing a singlet and large underpants with absolutely no image to speak of was young master Andrira Lung. When they left Seven Lights back then, the ones who wanted to drag Silen out and give him a good beating the most were Lung and Knight. They hadn't heard from Silen for almost 3 years, so it would be strange if they weren't excited when they suddenly heard his name. In young master Lung's eyes, etiquette, demeanor and whatnot were all for outsiders to see. Since there were no outsiders now, then what was the point of etiquette? Lung spun a few times on the spot and asked again, are there any images? Yes, but there aren't many. Also, the time is too short, so we couldn't find any detailed information about that Sillin. We only know that he met Costella at Fenier's family's little garden, at Sector X. Brzett brought up the image and said. The fact that Sillin and Tang Chiochio were Vanguard Division 6 was only known by Costella and a few other core figures. No one else knew about it. Lung frowned and stared for a long while before pointing at the person on the image Brzett brought up. Who's that dumb-looking idiot over there? He's Sillin. Brzett answered. Lung's expression was odd. Did that guy go for a full plastic surgery? What a waste, his appearance is getting worse and worse, and he looks a lot more robust. I can't tell just from the image, but I can recognize him in person. However, the only person who had the ability to discover Pescado, also known as Sillin, was probably the one in his memory. After a moment of silence, Lung said to Brzett, didn't you say a few days ago that there's a planet in Sector T that you're going to develop jointly with another family? Call Fenier's people over and discuss the terms of the partnership. But young master, you've already confirmed the House of Evigo as the partner yesterday, swap it out. We haven't signed the contract yet, right? There's another partnership in 10 days. At most, we'll give priority to Evigo as compensation. Lung said unconcernedly. All right, I'll contact Kirk immediately. After Brzett left, Lung started rummaging through one of the storage cabinets in the room. He remembered that he bought a pair of boxing gloves last year. When they left Seven Lights, Lung and Nate had agreed that the next time they saw Sillin, they would first kick him like this, then that, and then give him a good beating. Chapter 151. Inside the manor on planet Zafia, Kirk finally had some free time after he was done with his business. He laid down and took a short nap. This incident gave Kirk a wake-up call. He had always underestimated a tamer's abilities. No matter how limited a single tamer's abilities were, at the very least, they had put the Fenier's family in a very passive position. The prawns and crabs that should have been served to the dining table could paralyze their protective shield for a dozen or so minutes. A dozen or so minutes was enough to accomplish a lot of things. For those people who were fighting against the shoals, even a second was torture, much less a dozen or so minutes. There was also the 3 crabs in Tobo's room. No one knew how far they could go. Fortunately, the little hunter girl had killed them at the first sign of trouble. Another thing worth rejoicing over was that the Binger family had sent over this time was the Mermaid Princess Warsaw. Otherwise, they would probably have to resort to weapons of mass destruction to end the battle against that many shoals and a dozen or so giant deep-sea beasts. Normally, a family would be very reluctant to use weapons of mass destruction on a planet that had been set up as a base in a large sector. Who would be willing to set off cannons in front of their home unless it was absolutely necessary? Sector H was a sector dominated by the sea, and could not be measured by the standards of other sectors. All of planet Zafia's defense systems must be upgraded and redeployed strategically. Kirk thought as he relaxed and rested. Who knew that his communicator would ring just as he entered the state, and it was the communicator exclusive for official business. What is it? Boss, Andriaras Brzett is requesting a call. Kirk's heart skipped a beat. Brzett? Kirk knew of that inconspicuous little old man. There was no one on planet Auroch who did not know of that little old man. He was the smiling tiger of the Andriara family. God knows how many people had died under the fangs of this smiling tiger. To be honest, Kirk really did not want to tangle with the Andriara family right now. The Andriara family's influence in Sector H was ranked in the top 3 of the large sector, and they were even more influential than the Fenier's family and the Binger family who had made their fortune here in the first place. However, their previous few collaborations had all fallen through without any good results. But why did this old man Brzett come looking for him of his own accord? Speaking of which, Sillin hadn't woken up since he returned to his guest room and fell asleep. In his dream, his consciousness controlled the analysis of the data, and he dissected the tamer's control methods and spectra in depth. He had to admit that the tamer was not simple. Every change in frequency was a command, and this command had to be accepted and understood by the school of fishes, or it could lead to a tendency in their thinking. The audio spectrum was like a password that transmitted information. It was quite complicated. At least, Silen could not decipher the password with the information he had collected. Silen opened his eyes and stretched. He looked at Huimao, who was curled into a ball and sleeping soundly, and got out of bed. I'm hungry. Let's find something to eat. After comforting his stomach, Silen went to look for Tang Qiuqiu. However, Tang Qiuqiu did not seem to be stressed at all. She was still playing her game. She ignored Tobo and the others who took the initiative to talk to her. He was in the middle of clearing the stage, so how could he have the time to care about unrelated people? When he returned to the guest room, Silen noticed that Castella was already waiting inside. Huimao was still asleep, completely ignoring Castella. What's the matter that requires your presence? Silen smiled. There's something I need to explain. We're going to Sector H's capital planet, Auroch first. Kirk is going there to discuss a contract, and I need to go there to take a look. When the contract is done, we'll depart for Sector F directly from planet Auroch. Sure, I have no objections. We can also visit Sector H's capital Auroch while we're at it. That's good. It's a bit of an emergency, so we'll depart tomorrow. Alright. Silen had nothing to pack anyway. He could leave whenever he was notified. He had heard of Auroch Sector's great name since a long time ago, but he had never gone there personally. This was a good opportunity, and the Fenier's family would take care of his food and lodging. Why not? After Castella left, Huimao opened his eyes, stuck out his butt and stretched his waist. He shook his fur and jumped onto the table. There was a dried fish that Silen had just brought back. Silen, I overheard Kirk's conversation on the communicator just now. Huimao said while chewing on the dried fish. What's the important matter? Silen sat down on the recliner, opened a book and said. Cooperation, nothing important. But I heard another family name. This time the Fenier's family is going to discuss cooperation with the Andryra family. Kirk called them Berzet, and judging from his voice, he sounds like an old man. Huimao was calm, but Silen almost flipped off the recliner. His face twitched again and again. The Andryra family, although he didn't want to meet them right now, Silen couldn't just leave Tang Qiuqiu alone. Moreover, he had already agreed to go with them. Sigh, never mind. I'll have to face them sooner or later. But I might not run into them. After all, the Andryra family had so many properties. If they did meet, I wonder if they would fight. There was no way Silen could imagine that young Master Lung had already started preparing his boxing gloves. Seeing Silen's silence, Huimao asked, What are you thinking about? Silen smiled slightly, I'm thinking of a few friends. Friends? Which hunter regiment? Are they as famous as Vanguard? Huimao tilted his head and asked. Huimao couldn't be blamed for thinking like this. After all, the people Huimao had met since he left hunting planet TH-036 were all hunters. Families like the Fenier's family were financiers, and people like Poison Fong were prey to be hunted. Therefore, those who could be considered friends should all be hunters. No, they're not hunters. Not hunters. Silen nodded, although I haven't known them for long, they are very worthy of deep friendship. He scratched Huimao's chin and slowly told him some of the things that happened in Seven Lights. Early the next morning, the group boarded the starship and headed towards planet Auroch. Looking at the information regarding planet Auroch in his hands, Silen felt a little complicated. The big business families Andryra, Duance, Binger, Feniers, Furlan and so on all had branches on this planet. There were a lot of familiar families. However, the current Silen had changed greatly compared to 3 years ago. They might not be able to recognize him even if he were to stand in front of them. There were a few huge spaceports outside of planet Auroch, and all starships were docked inside. All spaceships that entered the planet also had to go through strict inspection to prevent them from bringing in infectious viruses and parasites. Spaceships without a spaceship pass were not allowed to enter the planet. Big families like the Phoenix family had all applied for the relevant pass. Those who did not have the qualifications to apply for a pass could only enter the planet on a transport plane arranged by the government. There was also a military garrison on the planet, so relatively speaking, the planet's public security was pretty good on the surface. But in the dark, there were bound to be many turbulent waves. Who on this planet didn't have a few tricks up their sleeves? If they couldn't do it in the light, they would try to do it in the dark. There were definitely a lot of people who were thrown into the sea to feed the fish every day. After the starship was docked at the spaceport, it was handed over to the Phoenix family's guards at the spaceport to manage and protect it. The others then transferred to spaceships and entered the planet. The Phoenix family's branch here had a spaceship's landing area. Before Kirk and the other spaceships arrived, the other spaceships and planes on the field had already made way for them. There were already some high-ranking managers in the tall building belonging to the Phoenix family who came out to greet them, and the bodyguards and guards took their respective positions. Under the grand welcome, Kirk, Costella and the others entered the tall building. Just like before, Costella had someone arrange a guest room for Cylon. After a simple tidying up, under Huemao's urging, Cylon bade farewell to Steele and left the building. Costella was probably busy right now and could not find anyone, so he had Steele pass the message on his behalf. Truth be told, Tang Kukikyu really wanted to come out and play as well, but because she had a mission to complete, and Tobo had been told that he was not allowed to leave the building, she could only play games inside. However, it was only when Cylon promised to bring her sweets that Tang Kukikyu felt a little more balanced. Where are we going first? Cylon opened the map of planet Auroch. Let's go to the Eternal Square. That place is the biggest. Huimao patted a spot on the map with his paw and said. Alright, let's go to the Eternal Square first. They hailed a flying car and entered the high-speed passage. One man and one cat headed towards the Eternal Square. The Eternal Square was the biggest square on planet Auroch. It was not located in the business district, and it was not in the territory of the big business families. The closest building to the Eternal Square was the towering twin towers of Sector H's United Government. If one had to name the most attractive thing in the Eternal Square, then it would definitely be the statue of Sea God. Beneath the giant statue, everyone was as small as an ant. Standing on the square and looking at the giant statue at the center of the square, Huimao asked, "Why does Sea God look like a human?" Because this statue was made by a human, and humans have always been self-centered. Cylon answered. The dolphins around him are so dumb. Because it's a statue, not a living one. Why is he holding a fork? Is it to stab a fish? That's called a trident. Let's go to the statue. I'm going to climb onto Sea God's head. Cylon felt a gaze lingering on him. He looked back. There was a person sitting under the statue. He wore a singlet, beach pants, flip-flops, a pair of brown glasses that almost covered half his face, and a pair of boxing gloves the size of pumpkins on each of his hands. Actually, they were meant for King Kong, weren't they? The two large boxing gloves he wore on his hands collided with each other, producing banging sounds. Lung watched the approaching person through the brown glasses. He wasn't sure before, but when Cylon looked over, Lung knew that this was the guy who played dead. Cylon was a little surprised. He didn't expect to run into Lung here. He thought that even if he did, it would be in the business district. Cylon, Lung said. Although it was a questioning tone, there was certainty in his voice. Cylon didn't deny it. He knew that Lung had recognized him, so he nodded with a smile, long time no see. Lung stood up and cracked his neck. Without another word, he kicked Cylon and punched him with two big fists. Cylon, on behalf of Knight, on behalf of C.I. Jincheng, on behalf of BPT, on behalf of Hard, on behalf of Surd, on behalf of Pride, on behalf of Sir Mo, on behalf of everyone in Seven Lights, I'm going to beat you up. Chapter 152. Logically speaking, a fight in Eternal Square was a serious matter. Moreover, Sector H's government's iconic building, the Twin Towers, was not far away from Eternal Square. Fighting in front of a government building was pure contempt for the sector's government, wasn't it? It was noon right now, and there weren't many people in the square. However, people would walk by from time to time, but they kept their distance from the duo. No one would do something as stupid as mediating a fight, and most people preferred to find a shady place to watch the show. It wouldn't be long before the security team would come to arrest them. However, these people were destined to be disappointed. 1 minute, 2 minutes. More than 5 minutes passed, and the fight was still as intense and spirited as ever. However, not even a shadow of the security team was seen, and not even the environmental protection robots that people called one-track-minded, moved. In the past, anyone who made a few moves or cursed a few times in Eternal Square would be fined by the environmental protection robots, and those who refused to pay would be punished with electric shocks and forced to pay. But what was going on right now? 200 meters away, an environmental protection robot had just given a person who had cursed, refused to pay a ticket, and even pointed at Silin Helong and defended himself. The deep blue lightning caused the bystanders to shiver uncontrollably. Most people here had similar experiences, and they could empathize with the situation. Inside the security building at the edge of the square, a team of soldiers was watching the situation on the screen. "Captain, are we really not going to deal with this? Will there be negative consequences?" "No need." The captain pointed at Lung, who was wearing beach shorts, flip-flops, and 2 pumpkin-sized boxing gloves on the screen, and said to his subordinate, "As long as he doesn't bomb the Twin Towers of the coalition government, let him do as he pleases." Oh. The other team members understood, Plan Outsider. The reason the environmental protection robots seemed to know nothing about Silin Helong's fight was because Lung belonged to the Plan Outsider. The environmental protection robots had a few alternative settings in their programming. On planet Aurok, there was a small group of people who belonged to the Plan Outsider. As long as they didn't do anything that threatened the planet, their actions could be ignored. This was the Outer Circle plan. This small group of people did not belong to the normal management of planet Aurok, so they were called the Outer Circle plan. They were people who enjoyed special privileges outside of the normal management. Andrila Lung was clearly one of the people who were part of the Outsider plan. "I've been in the public security team for so long, but this is the first time I've seen people from the Outsider plan fight in Eternal Square. They're really arrogant," a member of the public security team said. Generally, the people who participated in the Outsider plan were all people with high positions and great influence. Who would be so bored as to fight in public? Moreover, he was dressed like this. What self-restraint, demeanor, and etiquette? Who would associate such a person with someone from the Outsider plan? Silin Helong fought with all his might, as if he wanted to fight back all the fights of the past 3 years. Hui Mao ignored them. It jumped onto the statue and began to climb. Well, later, it would sit on the head of the sea god and look down on all living beings. An hour later, on the steps beside the fountain in the square, Silin Helong and Silin sat. Each of them was holding a large glass of red wine ice cream. Silin had paid for it. Both of their faces were black and blue, and their hair was a mess. Lung's brown glasses had been smashed to pieces a long time ago, and right now he was lying inside the cleaning robot's stomach. 2 pumpkin-sized boxing gloves were lying next to him. They were incredibly tattered, and Lung's slippers were also wadded up. "You, how dare you fight back?" Lung said while licking his ice cream in a very ungraceful manner. "You're the one who said that you would represent Night, Ci Jincheng, BPT, Hard, Surd, Pride, Sir Mo, and everyone in 7 Lights. I counted with my fingers, and there are exactly 8 representatives, and I gave you 8 of them. Fuck. You're as scum as ever. Thank you for the compliment." "Same here." Lung raised his foot and shook the wadded things hanging from it. He said, "Let me tell you, this pair of slippers is my treasure. I bought it from a great beauty with a hot body, and when I bought it, that beauty even left a fiery red lipstick mark on it. Even when Berzette threw it into the sea, I had to go to great lengths to retrieve it. Now that you've turned it into this state, tell me, how should I compensate you? Sillin thinks for a moment before finishing the rest of the ice cream in the cup. Then, he tore the box made of biodegradable fibers into a slipper shape and tossed it to Lung. Here, it still carries the fragrance of red wine. Lung. Crack, crack, crack. Another round of fighting sounds. How are Knight and Ci Jincheng? Sillin washed his face with the water beside the fountain and asked. You still have the nerve to ask? At the time, Knight almost tore down the hospital. Lung slowly told Sillin everything that had happened in the past 3 years. Back then, after Sillin faked his death and left Seven Lights, Lung and Knight had completed all their credits in half a year and applied to graduate straight away. Knight was dragged back by his old man. After joining the military, he would often participate in some missions. Lung had no idea how he was doing. The military's confidentiality was too high, but from the last conversation he had with Knight, Lung learned that the guy had been promoted to the rank of first lieutenant this year. However, Knight was not satisfied. Pride's brother Ji Feihong had already been promoted to the rank of captain. It wasn't easy to increase one's military rank in the League of Stars, and it was obvious that Knight had put in a lot of effort to get to the rank of first lieutenant this quickly. Knight's plan was to become a field officer within 2 years. This plan was extremely difficult in the eyes of a normal person, but Sillin believed that Knight would definitely be able to achieve this goal with his abilities. Ci Jincheng's achievements were even more impressive. He was a specially recruited student to begin with, and he had his own research project the moment he entered Seven Lights. He often traveled between various research bases. A specially recruited student like him had a different standard, and was not limited by credits. In comparison, he had more freedom. Although his background was deep, Ci Jincheng had completed several research results with contribution points above 70 with his own abilities. Ci Jincheng's image could be seen in academic journals with contribution points above 70. Moreover, due to his brilliant achievements, Ci Jincheng was recommended by several academicians to take up a post in the League of Stars' Research Institute. Lung did not know what he was researching right now, but he heard that if he could produce results successfully, then the results could be published in the journal, Code. In other words, this result's contribution to the League of Stars would be at least 90. With Ci Jincheng's current age, he could be called a genius among geniuses if he could appear in Code. Seven Lights' great instructors and the higher-ups practically treated Ci Jincheng like a treasure. Whatever Ci Jincheng needed, he only needed to say the word, and the higher-ups would approve it immediately without any application. Research funds, experimental equipment, the opening of the base. As long as Ci Jincheng said the word, there was no obstruction. If he can produce results successfully, then that guy can be directly promoted to a 1-star academician in the field of science and technology. In my impression, academicians are usually little old men. That guy is an exception. Lung said with a smile. Academician. As the most outstanding scientific elite and academic authority, only the League of Stars Research Institute had the right to confer the title of academician in the entire Galactic Alliance. The League of Stars Research Institute was the highest academic institution in the field of science and technology and the engineering field of the League of Stars. It was the comprehensive research and development center of high and new technology in the entire Galactic Alliance. It was also the highest honorary and consulting academic institution. When it came to academics, they were the absolute authority, the absolute titans. Mo Hung was one of them. As a veteran academic authority who had immersed himself in engineering for many years, Mo Hung was already a 4-star academician. This was also one of the reasons why so many people respected and feared Mo Hung. The title of academician granted by the League of Stars Research Institute was divided into 5 levels, from the initial 1-star to the 5-star academician. The star level would increase according to the person's contribution to the League of Stars and the accumulated contribution points. Only those who had the title of academician could be considered to have truly stepped into this circle of authority. It was extremely rare for C.I. Jincheng to challenge the title of academician when he was in his 20s. That guy really is something. Sillin agreed. Tisk, just because Knight and C.I. Jincheng made comparisons in front of me, I was forcefully dragged back by my old man to manage my affairs. He even froze my personal accounts. I'm poor right now, can't you see that I can only dress like this? Bullshit, dressing like this is purely your own twisted taste. Sillin knew that this was just Lung's complaint. If he really didn't allow for the accounts to be frozen, who would be able to freeze all of Lung's personal accounts so easily? What about you? Sillin, how does it feel to be a hunter? Lung had no intention of hiding the investigation at all. It's all right. What did you find out? Too little time. All I know is that you're a hunter who accepted a job from the Fenier's family. I didn't accept a job from the Fenier's family. The one who accepted the job was that kid who was with me. I was just getting some spare cash along the way. You're quite nice to that little girl. I wonder what Ling Long would do if she saw this. Lung said while rubbing his chin. Sillin raised his foot and kicked him. Get out of here. You're just spouting nonsense. Lung chuckled and dodged. Hey, speaking of which, your strength has improved again. You're A rank now, aren't you? MN, Sillin nodded. No wonder you were able to discover Pescado. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I was the one who sent the one who stirred up trouble on planet Zafia. The person you discovered is called Pescado. No one had ever discovered him when he made a move before. I didn't think that he would fail right in front of you this time, hee. Lung didn't feel embarrassed at all and took the initiative to say it out loud. So that's how it is. Sillin abruptly recalled what that familiar feeling was when he saw his tamer back then. Back when they participated in the sector championship, Lung had once caught Bowen of the 2nd Military Academy in the lake after knocking him unconscious. When Lung had brought Bowen to Sillin, he had given Sillin a feeling similar to a tamer. However, Lung had probably just come out of the lake at the time, and he hadn't completely withdrawn his aura yet. It was just a flash, and the impression it left on Sillin was brief and hazy. So you're the legendary tamer. Surprised, right? This young master is the legendary tamer who received the sea god's inheritance. Lung said proudly. A pause later, Lung asked mysteriously, which hunter regiment are you in right now? Vanguard, 6th Division, Vice Commander. Holy shit. One of the big four, No, wait, 6th Division. Lung's mouth formed an O shape. You mean the one who destroyed the biggest terrorist organization in Sector V, Poison Fang? Sillin nodded. Lung gave him a thumbs up. He had been optimistic about the 6th Division since the moment he heard the news. Perhaps, in the near future, the 6th Division would become the leading B squadron of Vanguard. He stretched his waist and moved his arms. When he looked up, he saw a certain cat standing on top of the sea god statue's head and looking down at the world with a narcissistic look. What's up with that cat? It's improving itself. There was a reason why Lung and Celine were talking so brazenly in this place. There was a technological product developed by the Andryra family in Lung's trouser pocket. People 2 meters away from them would not be able to hear anything. This was because the sound waves had been distorted beyond 2 meters, and they would only hear some rustling sounds. Come sit at my place. I'll show you my dearest sofa. Lung stood up and pulled Sillin towards the outside of the square. Sillin beckoned Hui Mao to come back. While Lung was pulling Sillin towards the outside of the square, a long flying car with its back facing them slowly drove towards the twin buildings of the sector government. However, it suddenly came to a halt. Inside the flying car, a girl wearing fashionable sunglasses looked out of the window. What's wrong, miss? A bodyguard beside the girl asked. Nothing, I just saw an old friend. The corner of the girl's lips curled upwards. She did not need to look at the person's face. She only needed to look at the person's back. Even if the back was completely different from her impression, she knew that it was that person. Lung pulled Silen to the hovering parking lot at the side of the square and brought out his sea blue flashy car with phoenix-shaped headlights. After driving out of the square, Silen asked, "Why were you in such a hurry to leave just now?" "Oh, you noticed?" Lung shrugged, "You want to meet up with Linglong?" Silen smiled wryly, "I'm not really prepared for that." After Silen faked his death and left Seven Lights, the Gallo family had been harassed a little. Aflon told him that it was Linglong's doing. "That's why you should stay away for a while." That being said, Silen, Linglong is really not a simple woman. However, she seems to be interested in you. Lung winked. Silen gave him a slap, "Drive your car." Lung's flying car drove straight into the floor where Lung's office was located in the Andryra building. It was not far away from the office door, and a couple of bodyguard-like people were standing outside the door with serious expressions on their faces. Their eyes were sharp and intimidating. Crouching on Silen's shoulder, Hui Mao looked at the people, tilted his head, raised his hind legs and calmly scratched his ears. Then, he sighed emotionally, dumber than the dolphin statue at Sea God's side. Lung felt the same way, yeah, dumber than shit. The people's faces twisted, and they wanted to flip the table in their hearts. "We know this is stupid, but what can we do? It's Bear Grylls who pays our salaries." Lung showed Silen his beloved shell sofa, and Silen despised it to the extreme. Hui Mao, on the other hand, had his eyes set on the floor-to-ceiling aquarium in Lung's office. He crouched on top of the aquarium and scooped the fish. Feeling that it was not enough, he jumped straight into the aquarium and molested it, causing all the fish inside to hide in a corner and tremble. Lung sighed repeatedly, "This cat is a masterpiece." Now that he knew that Silen was in Vanguard Division 6, it would be much easier to find him later on. "Before you return to the 6th team, if you want to contact me or need help, just look for the supervisor at any of Andryra's companies and pass this to him." Lung took out a card and passed it to Silen. The card had the word Lung written on it in more than 20 languages. Silen accepted the card. With this card alone, Silen could seek help at any place the Andryra family was involved in. For a hunter who often ran around and wandered between life and death, this was a great help. "This is for you." Silen raised his hand and tossed a green ball to Lung. It was one of the 5 big green pearls he obtained at Sector Z. "This is good stuff," Lung exclaimed as he held it in his hand. With his eyesight, he naturally knew the value of this green pearl. "I'm so sorry." That may be what he said, but the expression on Lung's face was, "Don't even think about going back on your word. I'd rather die than return it." Silen couldn't help but give the idiot another kick. After Silen and Hui Mao had left Andryra's home tower, Berzet walked in and looked at his young master who was lying on the sofa and staring at the green pearl in his hand like it was a treasure. He frowned and asked, "Why?" Berzet was asking why Lung would fight with Silen in a public place like Eternal Square. With Lung's intelligence, he shouldn't have lost face and caused a ruckus so brazenly. "It's nothing. I just wanted to tell some people that I know this person, and we have a pretty good relationship. I'm just telling those who are planning to play dirty tricks to restrain themselves a little." "You're not afraid that he'll tell the Fenier's family about this?" "No, he won't." Seeing that Berzet was still frowning, Lung smiled. "Berzet, did you know that our hostel was known as the best hostel in Seven Lights University? Andryra Lung, Fiegler Knight, Ci Jincheng, and Silen. How could someone who was favored by the first 3 be weak?" "Is it worth it?" Berzet asked. "It's worth it." Lung turned to look at Berzet. "What, you don't believe me?" Berzet smiled and shook his head. "I do. You Andryra people are all a bunch of weirdos. However, it's been 3 years since you last saw each other. Don't you need to have a good chat? If you're willing, young master, you can also invite him to be a guest here more often. Our negotiation with the Fenier's family will continue for another 2 days. No need. He has his own business to attend to, and I don't want that woman Linglong to come knocking on my door. Besides, I believe that we will be working together very soon after this. Brisette's eyes flashed. Young master, are you talking about the matter at Sector S? Yeah, it's been 50 years. It's about time we started. Chapter 153. While Lung and Brisette were talking, the communicator in the office outside the lounge rang, and it seemed to be going out of control. Lung covered his ears and rolled around on the seashell sofa. It must be that woman, Yu Linglong. I'm not going to pick her up even if you beat me to death. If you don't pick her up, I'm guessing that little princess Yu will come for you directly, Brisette said with certainty. I don't care. I won't meet her even if she comes for me. If she had even a tenth of her courage to meet Silen, would I have to be like this? When he thought about how Yu Linglong had turned from a highly intelligent and dangerous woman into a gentle and harmless little lamb when she talked about Silen, Lung felt goosebumps all over his body. Brisette sighed. But, the Andryra family's business will be affected. If that's the case, I don't know how long you'll have to stay here, young master. The old master had given him a mission to be forcefully thrown to planet Auric to manage the affairs of the Andryra family. If he did not meet the old master's standards, then Lung would have to stay here forever. Hearing Brisette's words, Lung, who was rolling around on the sofa, froze. He straightened his back and rushed toward the office. You can take the opportunity to fight for the development rights of that planet in the HU district, Brisette reminded him from behind. That's a must. If he did not talk about conditions, he would be a fool among fools. Silen was completely unaware of Linglong and Lung's troubles. After leaving the Andryra family's building, he went to buy some candies along the way. This was what he promised Tang Qiuqiu. Planet Auric was filled with money, power, and desire. High-end flying cars could be seen everywhere, and people more beautiful than the last ostentatiously flaunted their wealth. Walking on the streets, the workers who came and went in a hurry seemed to be wearing a layer of mask on their faces, and their hearts could not be seen. The rapid pace of life left people with no time to relax, and they gradually became numb to it. They had unknowingly gotten used to putting on a disguise. When he returned to Fenir's place, Castella and Kirk looked at Silen with a strange expression. Vice Captain Silen, you and the young master of the Andryra family have a good relationship? Castella asked. Yeah, we knew each other a long time ago. We haven't seen each other for a few years. Today, we got to get to know each other. Silen didn't try to hide it either. He knew that the Fenir's family had sent someone to follow them, so they must have known about the situation in the square. However, Silen did not intend to say anything more. Silen did not care what Castella and Kirk thought. Tang Qiuqiu's mission this time was more or less completed. After talking for a while, Silen went to find Tang Qiuqiu and gave her the colored candy and toothpaste he had bought on the way here. However, Silen didn't know that his position in Castella and Kirk's hearts had risen by yet another level. Not just anyone could have such a good relationship with young Master Lung. In fact, Lung had only given the quota to the Fenir's family because of Silen's face. In this case, it would seem that the cooperation negotiation this time would go relatively smoothly. In terms of influence in Sector H, the Fenir's family and the Bin family combined might not necessarily compare to the Andryra family. This was also the reason why Castella thought more highly of Silen. They probably didn't expect that the thing that caused them such great trouble in Zafia not long ago was young Master Lung's handiwork. In the next 2 days, just as Castella thought, their cooperation negotiation with Andryra went quite smoothly. 2 days later, both parties signed the contract, and the rest was Kirk's responsibility. Castella still had to escort Tobo back. Hui Mao was quite happy to leave this planet. He didn't like this planet. Of course, that aquarium in Lung's office was the exception. They boarded the starship once more, left the most gorgeous planet in Sector H, and flew straight to Sector F. The flight was very smooth. They didn't run into any obstructions or other troubles, and when they approached Sector F, they ran into the Fenir's family's corvettes that had been ordered to wait for them. With these corvettes, it could be said that Tang Kakikiu's mission had come to an end. Silen and Tang Chocho did not follow Castella and the others to the Fenier's family's headquarters. When they passed by the transfer planet at Sector F, Silen and Tang Chocho boarded the spaceplane Castella had arranged for them and landed on the transfer planet. Tang Chocho received the 2 million reward for this mission, and she was so excited that she couldn't sleep well for a few days. She kept thinking about where to go next. Inside a restaurant on the FC-100 Transit Star, Tang Chocho flipped through the documents in her hands. These documents were about some of Sector F's tourist attractions. Even Tang Chocho felt dizzy just looking at them. If it was possible, she really wished that she could visit every single one of them. Unable to make a choice, Tang Chocho pushed the documents to Silen. "You choose, Big Brother Silen." "I don't know where to go." Silen received Tang Chocho's information and gave it a look. He was mainly looking at the characteristic planets of Division FC because they were closer to this place, and there would be fewer incidents involving the Fenier's family if they were in Division FC. "How about this one?" Silen pointed at one of the introductions and said. It was one of the more famous planets of Sector FC, Acerella. Acerella meant flying car in Sector F sector language, and just like its name, Acerella was famous for its flying car race. Every year, a lot of people would travel to Acerella to watch the flying car race, and there were many places in Sector F that broadcast the race. But if the conditions were right, more people would be willing to watch the race in person. However, Acerella's championship race had not arrived yet. If they went now, they would only be able to watch the elimination race. This was a pity to Silen. Not bad. But, Big Brother Silen, what does 3 in the Triceratops flying car race mean? Tang Chocho asked interestedly. Beside her, Hui Mao, who was struggling with grilled fish on his plate, also pricked up his ears. A flying car that can travel normally in all 3 conditions, water, land, and air, is called a Triceratops flying car race, and a race that only uses Triceratops flying car race is called the Triceratops flying car race. The race venue should also be suitable for all 3 environmental conditions. Silen explained. The Triceratops flying car race was a favorite sport of many people in the galaxy. More commercial activities were launched because of the Triceratops flying car race. Among them was car gambling. Back at Planet Brown Earth in Sector X, old Devon often gambled cars, and Silen had helped him win some prize money from car gambling to improve his life. It sounds interesting. Let's go to Acerella then. Right now, Acerella's championship race is far from here. If we go, we will only be able to watch the elimination race. That's fine too. I want to see what the Triceratops flying car race is like. Tang Chocho's eyes were bright with yearning. The Triceratops flying car race sounded very exciting. There was even a spectator group specifically going to Acerella's race under Acerella's introduction. However, neither Silen nor Tang Chocho were willing to join the group. They preferred to move around freely. After the meal, 2 people and 1 cat casually strolled around the transit planet before boarding the passenger plane to Acerella. Hui Mao seemed to have gotten used to it. He immediately switched to sleep mode after entering the pet cabin. When they came out of Acerella's port, the first reaction people had was, there were so many cars. There were all kinds of flying cars of all shapes and sizes. There was also a big electronic sign at the port's exit that displayed the recent Triceratops flying car race and replays of classic clips. It attracted a lot of people to stop and stare. After they had prepared their food and some equipment, Silen, Tang Chocho, and Hui Mao boarded a passenger car headed to a city that was closer to them. Planet Acerera did not have a large population. Compared to other planets of the same size, the population was pitifully small. Many of the people who came to compete were from other planets, and the people who ruled the planet were also transferred over from other planets. Therefore, Acerella's native population was basically on the low side. The main reason for Acerella's low population was its geography. Of course, it was also famous for its geography. The planet's unique geography made the Triceratops flying car race famous. More and more flying car enthusiasts came here to participate in the race. Due to the large number of foreigners every year, people from Sector F and the few sectors around Sector F would come here out of admiration. Therefore, people spoke the common language of the League of Stars on Acerella. However, many of them spoke with their own sector's accent. As for the Acerella natives, they also spoke the common language of the League of Stars. Although it wasn't standard, it was still understandable. The windows of the passenger car were closed because the wind was strong. People said that people who came to Acerella for the first time should not miss the wind of Wind City other than watching the Triceratops flying car race. Wind City wasn't a city, but a large area made up of more than 10 cities. It covered millions of square kilometers and was called the Wind City region, or Wind City for short. The cities in the Wind City region often used Wind City as the prefix of their city name. Therefore, it was common to hear people say, Wind City XX, and so on. They were referring to a certain city in the Wind City region. Wind was a special characteristic of this place. It didn't have a fixed direction. It might blow from the front one moment, and from the back the next. Acerella's flying cars would go through special modifications so that they could find a sense of balance amidst the irregular airflow. The uninhabited areas of Wind City had a special landform similar to dry areas. Wind erosion played a role, and due to the constant erosion of the strong winds, the eroded valleys and depressions gradually separated into island-shaped platforms and hills. Then, they evolved into stone pillars or stone blocks. From afar, it looked like they had arrived at a decadent ancient city. The crisscrossing eroded valleys, stone pillars, and stone blocks looked like a group of buildings built along the streets. Every time a gale came, yellow sand would cover the sky, and the wind would surge and swirl inside these groups of buildings, howling shrilly like the wails of ghosts and the howls of wolves. It was a hair-raising sight. Therefore, there were people who described this area as Devil City. Due to millions of years of wind and sun, the flat sandstone layer in this area had formed various landforms such as eroded walls, eroded mushrooms, eroded pillars, eroded furrows, eroded depressions, ruined hills, castles and so on. The scenery was spectacular and amazing. There were also some oddly shaped mounds and mounds of different sizes. The mounds were dry and hard, row upon row. Whenever the shadow of a cloud floated past, or the wind stirred up the light sand, the mounds seemed to drift slowly, like a ship setting sail and a big fish swimming around. It was confusing and gave people endless imagination. If the rock layer was nearly horizontal and hard and soft rock layers alternated, the soft rock layer would be easily eroded, and the hard rock layer would be relatively prominent, just like the eaves. Here, it could be seen everywhere. Wow! Brother Silan, look, it looks like a snake is crawling. Tang Chochio, who was leaning against the window and looking outside, exclaimed excitedly. Silan looked in the direction that Tang Chochio was pointing at. The sand had been scraped by the wind, leaving a long, twisted mark on the sand. One end was slowly being covered by the sand, and the other end was facing the wind and continuing to cut through the sand layer in front of it. At first glance, it looked like a big snake crawling on the sand. Huimao squatted on Silan's shoulder, staring at the scene on the sand outside the window with his eyes wide open. His claws moved unconsciously, looking like he really wanted to go down and have fun. Hey, there's a stone ball there. It's so big. Tang Chochio said, the camera in her hand never rested. Who carved that? No, it's naturally formed. Silan explained, when a rock is exposed to the surface, it will be weathered. Because of its protruding edges, it is more susceptible to weathering. Its corners will be weathered in 3 directions, its edges will be weathered in 2 directions, and its surface will only be weathered in 1 direction. So, over time, under the effect of weathering, the edges of the big rock will gradually shrink, and eventually tend to become spherical, just like that big stone ball. Oh, I see. Tang Chochio noted down Silan's explanation in her mind. This was also a form of knowledge. Up ahead is one of the competition routes. Someone shouted. Everyone looked over and saw that there were two towering rock mountains. Between the two mountains was a narrow passageway that looked like a pipe. That passageway was one of the competition routes during the competition period. When air flowed in, the narrow passageway would accelerate the airflow, so it often formed a strong wind. In addition, the wind in Windy City was irregular, and the narrow passageway was crooked, so if one was not careful, they would crash into the rock mountains. It could be said to be extremely thrilling. Although this narrow passageway was very thrilling, it was only a small part of the Triamphibian flying car competition's route. According to the information, the Triamphibian flying car competition's route was almost all around the world, and this route involved dangerous areas on the planet. One of the most commonly used routes was the Windy City, Chilean Lake, Stone Forest route. Although the wind in Windy City was strong, if one was forced to fall, they could temporarily drive on the sand. However, they had to avoid the instantaneous gales, because those instantaneous gales would blow the car away. Experienced drivers would use the subtle changes in the sand to determine where the instantaneous gales existed and when they formed the strongest gales, so they could avoid them. The second major route was Chilean Lake. Chilean Lake was an underwater route formed by 7 large lakes that were connected by a passageway underwater. The lake was very deep, and there was basically no light passing through the passageway. It was very dark, and there were some aquatic animals and plants that could cause interference. If there was a problem with the power system, the car would sink to the bottom of the lake and sink into the mud. Coupled with the entanglement of aquatic plants, one could only use up the oxygen reserves before the rescue team arrived. If the oxygen reserves were insufficient or the oxygen supply system was abnormal, one would not be far from death. There were some other obstacles in the lake, but the public information in Silen's hands did not mention them, so it was obvious that it would be even more difficult. This was just the environmental factor. If the drivers tripped up each other, then there was no need to mention it. The third major route was the Stone Forest. The Stone Forest was a place where peaks stood tall and straight. The peaks were conical, tower-shaped, cylindrical, and other sharp peaks, with stone buds and karst ditches growing on the surface. The Stone Forest was very hard. In the Stone Forest area, once a car fell, it would basically not be able to fly again. Or the car would be destroyed, and the better ones would be stuck in the Stone Forest. Even if they could fly, the car would be damaged, which would have a huge impact on the later part of the race. Such a route was a test of the driver. Not only the driver's skills, but also their psychological and adaptability. Of course, experience was also essential. It was precisely because of the dangerous terrain, the high fatality rate, and the high rate of car damage that the racing enthusiasts were even more excited. However, Silen also wondered what the chances of a person who could drive a flying car so well in such a race would be like in a battle. There was no time to continue thinking about it. He had arrived at his destination. Silen was ready to get off at the Wind City Winto stop. Although the native population of Acerella was small, there were many foreigners, and all the hotels were full all year round. In Acerella, if you saw a towering and gorgeous building in the city, it was definitely a hotel. The cost of those hotels was frighteningly expensive, but they were always full, and you might not be able to book one even if you booked 3 months in advance. Therefore, for Silen, who had temporarily decided to come to Wind City, there was no doubt that Wind City Winto, which had the most backward living conditions, had more accommodation opportunities. They were not afraid of a little hardship, but the important thing was to have a place to live. It must be said that in a place like Wind City, sleeping in the wild was purely asking for trouble. Not to mention the low temperature at night, there were also strong winds and dust. If you were to stay in a tent, you might be swept away along with the tent. In Acerella's Wind City, many local residents lived in stone houses made of sand or rock. Compared to the towering and gorgeous buildings in the central area, these residential houses looked ancient and vicissitudes, and Wind City Winto undoubtedly played out this vicissitude even more strongly. The high-class hotels and the surrounding areas in the central area of Wind City Winto were all full. Because of the limited number of hotel rooms, some private houses would also vacate their rooms for rent. In fact, many local residents relied on rent to survive. If one day the tri-amphibian flying car competition was not held, and there were no more foreigners to stay, it was estimated that they would not be able to make a living. However, along the way, there were no more private houses. Hui Mao was lying on Silen's shoulder, looking powerless. What the fuck? This shabby place was so expensive, and the most infuriating thing was that it was so expensive, and yet it was full. Was this a scam? The sky gradually darkened, and just as Silen and Tang Kakikyu were looking for accommodation along the street, a rattling sound was heard from behind them, slowly approaching and stopping next to them. It was a flying car. The car was very old and belonged to the kind of old, broken car that made no sound except for the horn. Hui Mao raised its eyes to glance at the broken thing, and lowered its eyelids again. There was really nothing to look at, and looking at it one more time would only make it have the urge to let this broken car die of old age. Are you looking for accommodation? The hood of the old, broken car opened, revealing a young face covered in dust. Chapter 154. Silen looked at him. The young man in front of him was only 17 or 18 years old, but he exuded a maturity beyond his age. He had the same vicissitudes of the city, but the good thing was that he did not seem malicious. Yes, we're looking for a place to stay. Do you have a recommendation? The young man looked at them, raised his gloved hand, and put up a finger. 100 a day, galactic dollars. If you agree, I'll take you to see a house. Okay. Silen nodded. Compared to the houses in the center of the city, this price was more reasonable. The young man pointed to the seats behind them, which were made of faded old cloth. There was only one driver's seat in the front seat, and said, "Come on up." The two old flying cars looked shabby, and when they flew, it was terrifying. They shook back and forth, as if they wanted to shake out the little things left in their stomachs, and it gave the feeling that they would be blown away by the wind at any time. When they arrived at their destination, Tang Kakikyu was carried out by Silen. She was in a trance from the shaking and could not find her balance for a short period of time. Silen was not so serious, but Hui Mao on his shoulder looked at the shabby car with even more disdain. This confirmed his view: it was just a pile of junk. The place the young man was talking about was his home. It was located at the edge of Wind City, and it was a small two-story house made of rock. Looking at the stone, it was probably not too old, probably built in the last 5 years. There was a small courtyard, and in the corner of the courtyard were some old parts of the flying car, covered with a cover to prevent them from being blown away by the wind. After parking the car in the courtyard, the young man came out and pointed to the second floor of the house. You can go take a look first. If there's no problem, pay the rent and sign an agreement. Silen nodded and carried Tang Kakikyu to the second floor. There was a single staircase in the courtyard that led to the second floor, and Hui Mao had already jumped onto the stairs and rushed into the house. The house was not big, but the layout was clear. There was a bedroom, a living room, and a simple bathroom. The bed in the bedroom could be divided into 2 small beds. Silen first let Tang Qiuqiu lie down on the bed to rest. Hui Mao had already finished patrolling the site, and had also taken a shower in the simple bathroom. He was squatting on the windowsill, looking at the sand in the distance with a solemn expression. In the courtyard, a woman with a headscarf stood next to the young man. She should be the young man's mother. She was wiping the young man's face with a wet towel. Seeing Silen come down, the young man asked, "How was it?" "Not bad." Hearing Celine's words, the woman's eyes revealed joy. The young man passed the agreement he had drafted a long time ago to Silen. After Silen read through it and found that there were no problems, both parties signed the agreement. Silen paid the rent for 5 days straight away, and said that he would pay the rest if he continued to stay in the house. In addition, the water bill had to be calculated separately according to the volume. Night had fallen. Silen and Tang Qiuqiu simply ate something and then lay down to rest. Tang Qiuqiu soon fell asleep. Silen listened to the howling wind with high and low pitch, and finally realized what the devil's voice of Wind City was. Suddenly, Hui Mao's ears twitched and he jumped up. His eyes shone with a dim light. Silen, there's something coming out of the desert. I'm going to look for food. Go, don't make too much noise. Got it. Hui Mao couldn't wait to jump up, unlock the door, and rush out. When the door closed automatically, Silen opened his eyes and sighed. This place was even more polarized than planet Brown Earth. The luxurious central city and the old residential area were worlds apart. Although the wind and sand outside were strong, Silen slept well at night. However, in the middle of the night, Silen heard some noise in the courtyard. It was mixed with the chaotic sound of the wind, so it didn't seem so out of place. When it was almost dawn, Hui Mao came back with a satisfied look on his face. He even brought back a 2-meter-long snake for Silen and Tang Qiuqiu to enrich their diet. Right, Silen, I saw that kid in the sandstone area, Hui Mao said while lying on his side on the bed, licking his paws. It's the same old broken car. Driving over there, and he's not afraid of death. He's picking places with more stone eaves. He's probably practicing driving. He's a racing driver. Silen had noticed that the young man's arms and wrists were very strong, and his physique was quite good. At the same time, the young man wasn't as impulsive as other people his age. When he met Silen, he looked at him calmly, probably analyzing whether or not someone like Silen would be a good tenant. It was important to know that controlling the rudder at high speed under the influence of air pressure was quite strenuous, especially when cornering. Strong arms were needed to maintain the flying car on the desired route. Therefore, strong arms and wrists were a must in a long-distance race. In a racing car race, the strong horizontal centrifugal force during cornering would cause the driver's blood to flow to one side. However, at this time, the driver still needed to think calmly to face the next corner and the possible dangers that might arise. Moreover, the difference between the heartbeat at the start and during the race was relatively large, so the driver's cardiopulmonary function had to be abnormally strong. Not only that, but the body's endurance was also very important for a racing driver. In a race, even the shortest race would last more than 10 hours. However, after more than 10 hours of racing, the body's fat consumption and dehydration would total more than 10 kilograms. They needed to rehydrate, but they also had to take care of the dangers around them. Excessive dehydration could cause shock, and if they were distracted, it could be devastating for the driver. Apart from that, although there was a thermostat in the cockpit, damage was inevitable during a race. If the thermostat malfunctioned, the temperature in the cockpit would rise to more than 20 degrees higher than normal body temperature. Therefore, a driver without good endurance would be in trouble. Therefore, a driver's strong physique was one of their insurance. Hui Mao didn't take a good look at the young man. He only paid attention to the broken car. That broken car is a racing driver, he said disdainfully. Silen patted Hui Mao's head. Hurry up and go to sleep. It'll be dawn soon. 2 days before they arrived at Wind City, Silen and Tang Qiuqiu didn't go too far. They just wandered around Wind City Winto. Wind City's race was in 3 days, and the races in other regions were too far away. Tang Qiuqiu didn't want to go too far. Besides, no matter which region the race was, it was the same. They would watch Wind City's race first. After staying here for 2 days, Silen got to know the landlord a little better. The young man's name was Yudos Wentz. Wentz was his surname. Generally speaking, in the League of Stars, some big families with multiple names like to put their surnames first to show respect for the family. Therefore, people like Yudos didn't need to see him in person. They only needed to see his name to classify him as a commoner. Yudos meant chase in the sector language of Sector F. It seemed that Yudos liked his name a lot. It was said that Mrs. Wentz wanted to change his name for him, but he refused. Mr. Wentz passed away when Yudos was very young. Mr. Wentz was often sick from birth due to physical reasons, so when he was 16 years old, his parents married Mrs. Wentz, who was 10 years older than him. She was the woman Cylin saw in the courtyard. However, after Mr. Wentz passed away, his brother drove Mrs. Wentz and the 2-year-old Yudos out of the house. The orphan and the widow lived at the edge of the city. I forgot to mention that the Wentz family owned a relatively large flying car model shop at the center of Wind City Wentz. It was later purchased by outsiders, and the shop's name was changed. However, it was growing better and better, and the other Wentz family members were earning a considerable amount of money. In comparison, Yudos and Mrs. Wentz were much more miserable. Yudos worked for Wentz's convoy at Wind City. Although his income wasn't much, it was enough to support his mother and son's lives. He also collected rent. The house wasn't like this in the past. It was basically made of sand. Later on, Yudos earned some money from the convoy, so he demolished the sand house and rebuilt the stone house. Since Yudos spent most of his time outside, he didn't feel safe leaving his mother at home alone if he rented out the house. After all, not all the tenants who came to this place were easy to get along with. Therefore, every time, Yudos personally looked for tenants. He looked for people who seemed easy to get along with and had a high reputation. If he couldn't find a suitable person, he would rather not rent out. Mrs. Wentz had no other job. She took care of the tenants, washed clothes, and so on. In her spare time, she made some handicrafts and sold them for a little money. After all, in the era of high-tech domination, handicrafts were too cheap. A machine made things more accurate and beautiful, and it took less time, low cost, and high efficiency. However, handicrafts were more creative. As long as the producer had a good idea, there would still be people who would buy it. Although it couldn't be sold at an ideal price, it could still make up for the needs of life. This wasn't what Yudos and Mrs. Wentz said, but it was what the residents around them said. The people around them basically lived by collecting rent. When there was no flying car race, they spent most of their time chatting all day. Therefore, for them, Cylin and Tang Chiochio, who had just moved into Yudo's house, were the best people to talk to. At night, Tang Chiochio was lying on the bed looking at the introduction of the team. Brother Cylin, which team does Yudos belong to? The old man at the corner of the street last time said that he was in the Gale team. Gale. Tang Chiochio searched the information. Oh, not bad, ranked 4th on the planet. Okay, don't read too much at night and go to bed early. Cylin knocked on Tang Chiochio's head. Okay, I know. 5 more minutes, no, 15 more minutes, and then I'll go to bed. Cylin smiled and shook his head. He looked out of the dark window, thinking about something. Wheeze had gone out to look for food again. The little fellow had been living quite comfortably for the past 2 days, and the main reason was because it had seen a couple of high-level pets that had been trained to the point of being able to talk. Although they had seen rich people raising high-level pets that could talk back in Aurok, they didn't think that there would be high-level pets in this place as well. It was obvious that this was a place where the rich spent their time. Ever since he saw the high-level pets that could talk, Hui Mao was much more relaxed. He would say a few words on the road from time to time, enjoying the attention of passers-by. At the same time, he was also proud of the fact that the high-level pets that could talk had a thick accent in the language of the League of Stars. Regarding this, Hui Mao had improved himself again. After Tang Chiochio fell asleep, Cylin turned off the energy storage light and lay on the bed with his eyes closed. However, he didn't fall asleep. In the middle of the night, there was a knocking sound in the yard. Yudos was in the cockpit, preparing to take off when he heard the knocking sound. He turned his head to look and was so shocked that he almost jumped up. He didn't know when Cylin was standing next to the dilapidated flying car and was fastening the hood. Making a gesture, Cylin motioned for Yudos to open the hood. Although he was reluctant, he was still a renter and a provider of rent. Moreover, it seemed that Cylin and Tang Chiochio were good people these 2 days, so Yudos opened the hood and let Cylin come in and sit in the back seat. I can't sleep, so I want to go out for a walk. I know you're practicing driving, but you don't mind if I hitch a ride, right? Sillin wasn't embarrassed at all. You're already sitting in, what's the use of minding? Okay, as long as you can hold on. Yudos gritted his teeth. In the darkness of the night, Yudos didn't even turn on the lights, but very familiarly drove the old car out of the yard, away from Wind City, Winchuo, and into the uninhabited area outside. The old car was still bumpy, and coupled with Yudos' intention, it was so bumpy that it almost threw people out. But Yudos noticed that the person in the back seat, without fastening a seatbelt, was still sitting there with his eyes closed as if he was asleep. Yudos was surprised. What kind of freak is this guy? Shaking his head, Yudos no longer paid attention to Sillin and officially entered his training time. Sand dunes, stone eaves, narrow passages, the old car could always pass through these places smoothly in a bumpy state, and its speed wasn't slow. Of course, it was impossible to reach the speed of the flying car in the competition. After all, this old car used a storage battery. In this area, solar energy and wind energy were the main sources of energy. These two types of energy were converted into stored energy and stored in the storage battery to provide other power supplies, such as storage lamps, some household appliances, flying cars, and so on. The effect of the storage battery was obviously far inferior to the effect of the energy block, but the energy block was a luxury here, and only the team's competition cars used energy blocks. People like Yudos simply couldn't afford to use energy blocks, and could only rely on the storage battery to power the flying car. Although it used a storage battery, the speed of the old car Yudos was driving was much faster than other battery-powered flying cars, because he made full use of the wind, and in these challenging and dangerous places, he was calm and composed. Yudos' whole body seemed to have become one with the flying car, and he didn't need to rely too much on the airflow balancer. He was able to judge his next move just by the subtle impact of the airflow on the car body. This person seemed to be born to live in the wind, and he could fly freely. In the uninhabited area, people had a fearful attitude toward the wind here and avoided it. But Yudos felt unusually close to it, and he could feel the motivation brought by the wind. The wind seemed to be telling him, you can do it faster, better, faster, faster. At this moment, Yudos forgot about Sillin in the back seat, and was completely immersed in the world of himself, the flying car, and the wind. When turning a corner, Yudos skillfully controlled the car, making use of the airflow around the corner and the whistling wind to allow him to complete the turn more perfectly, but he didn't consider Sillin in the back seat. An extra person meant an extra weight, an element he couldn't control here. So when he controlled the car according to the thousands of times he had done before, he suddenly discovered his negligence. The rock protruding from the side of the mountain was getting closer and closer to the car. But Yudos reacted quickly, adjusting the control panel at an even faster speed, turning the rudder, and then tilting his body to a certain angle to coordinate with the car's movements. This series of actions was completed in an extreme amount of time, and the car almost brushed the edge of the rock. After turning the corner, Yudos didn't continue to drive in this narrow pipe, but instead drove the flying car out of the narrow pipe and landed behind the big rock mountain. He popped out the nails and tightly held onto the big rock mountain to prevent the flying car from being blown away by the wind. After the flying car stopped, Yudos leaned on the rudder, panting. "Oh, I made a mistake," Sillin opened his eyes and said. "You shut up, if you weren't in the car, how could this happen to me?" Yudos roared, his forehead covered in sweat, and his back was also covered in cold sweat. That was really too thrilling, and it was beyond his expectations, but fortunately, it was still under control, or else the two of them would have died here today. You can't blame the fault caused by your own negligence on others. After all, you knew before I was in the car, but at that time you forgot about it. Instead, you habitually followed the previous operation and used the habitual thinking to control the car. This is your own fault, you can't deny it. Yudos didn't speak again. He also knew where his mistake was, and indeed, this was a lesson. He was too confident, so confident that he ignored the critical factors. But the operation just now was very good, at least you didn't panic. If your reaction time was 0.1 seconds late, then we could only come into contact with the rock explosion. Yudos suddenly realized that the person sitting in the back seat was too calm, so calm that he was like a bystander. Are you also a flying car driver? Yudos asked solemnly. It should be known that in Wind City, there were many taboos between the drivers, and the contestants didn't like their driving habits to be noticed by others. If that was the case, it would be very disadvantageous to them. No, I spend more time driving a fighter jet than a flying car, Silen said. In the sixth team, fighter jet piloting was a compulsory course for the combatants. If you don't even know how to drive a fighter jet, how can you still fight? When he heard about fighter jets, Yudo's eyes lit up, but then they darkened. Do you want to drive a fighter jet? Silen asked. I'd be lying if I said I don't, but that idea is too vague. Yudos buried his head in his arms and said gloomily, Do you know what my job is? I only know that you work in the team. Oh, work. Yudos laughed at himself. Do you know, in the team, there is a kind of person called a substitute? Chapter 155. The so-called stand-ins are the ones who help the racing stars run the races. It's a well-known secret among the racing teams. The stand-in's name will never be on the trophy, let alone the prize money. The stand-in's winnings will be completely handed over to the team, and the team leader will reward them according to his mood. It's like charity. Those who win will at least get charity, but those unlucky ones who lose their lives will get nothing. They can only be turned into ashes by the jeers of the spectators, Yudos said gloomily as he leaned against the steering wheel. People like them, who clearly had exquisite driving skills, could only live in the dark. When they went out, they wore helmets, so people couldn't see their true faces. They were like the shadows of those glamorous stars. People could always see and cheer for Che Xing, who could always stand on the podium holding the trophy, waving to the audience and fans, laughing and blowing kisses. They would never know that the ones who finished the race just a moment ago were the local residents, who were regarded as inferior and poor and could only live in stone houses. Many local racers had died in the race for fame and glory that didn't belong to them. Compared to the official racers of the racing teams, these stand-ins didn't have their own cars, didn't have their own races, and could only contribute to other people's lives. They were all human beings, but their lives were so lowly. In the Acerella racing competition, there had been a stand-in who died in an accident, but in the media reports, it was only said that Che Xing was seriously injured and luckily kept his life. Not long after, Che Xing made a high-profile appearance again, but his stand-in was replaced. As for his previous stand-in, if he was lucky, he would get a sympathetic funeral fee, but if he was not, he would get nothing. Udo laughed hoarsely, which was not much better than crying. The funniest thing is, these unequal contracts are all signed by us, and many of us are trying our best to show off our skills to those people, hoping to get a contract to sell our bodies. Because even with such an unequal contract, the money we get is several times more than some of the coolies. I heard that the profit from a race can reach hundreds of millions, Silen said. Yes, hundreds of millions. Even if we lose, the team will still get tens of millions. If we win, we will get even more. Hundreds of millions is a common thing. The racers will get hundreds of thousands, and the good ones will get close to 1 million, while the star racers will get tens of millions. But for us, a few thousand, 10,000 on a good day. Yudos looked out of the car. Who knew how many corpses were buried under the sand, all scapegoats? Have you ever thought of leaving? Silen asked. Of course, but I can't. If I were to leave, I would definitely take my mother with me. However, according to Acerella's laws, every resident who left would have to pay a fee of 500,000 renminbi. 500,000, that's 1 million for 2 people. It's nothing to the official racers, but it's basically impossible for doubles like us. We might even lose our lives. I've heard that there's a betting system for car racing. Have you guys tried it? That's for the alien warriors. If locals are caught gambling, they will be fined. However, we will secretly use fake identities to bet some money. Do you know about hunters? Sillin asked. I know. Yudo's eyes lit up. I've seen a bounty hunter before. He's very strong. There are also some hunter regiments. 2 years ago, a hunter regiment came to Asarella to watch the championship of the amphibious flying car race. Even the team manager, who is usually arrogant, had to be careful in front of them. The investor of the Cyclone team is acquainted with that hunter regiment, and they are a very famous hunter regiment. I heard that they are ranked in the top 5 of Sector F. You must have heard of them before. Oh. What's it called? Sillin asked with great interest. It's called Golden Rose. Sillin rummaged through the information in his mind. He even read through the new top 100 GAL ranking list published by the authoritative publication Brave. Then, he said with certainty, I've never heard of it before. No way. You're too ignorant and ill-informed. Udo shouted with a look of disdain, that's one of the top 5 hunter regiments of Sector F. I heard that every single one of them is a seasoned veteran who has been to countless planets, seen countless strange things, and killed a lot of giant alien beasts. They even provided us with a huge statue that shines with dazzling multicolored light at night. Multicolored light, aren't they afraid of excessive radioactive elements? Sillin laughed involuntarily. The moment Yudos mentioned the hunter regiment, his dispiritedness from before was nowhere to be found. He even described them with body language, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws in excitement. By the time Yudos was done talking to himself and stopped, he discovered that Sillin had fallen asleep on the back seat with his eyes closed. Yudos looked at the person on the back seat and felt like he was playing the lute to a cow. He curled his lips and said, "What a weirdo." Then he started the flying car and bounced back to the yard. When Sillin got out of the car, the sky was already beginning to brighten. Patting Yudo's shoulder, Sillin said, "Work hard. We'll be watching the race the day after tomorrow and cheer for you." The corner of Yudo's mouth twitched, but he did not say anything. He closed the car cover and locked it before walking into the house. For shadows like them who lived in the dark, the cheers of the audience would never include their names. Back inside the house, Tang Chocho stared at Sillin with wide eyes and complained, "Big brother Sillin, I can't believe you went out to play alone. It can't be helped. Don't tell me you want to sit in that kid's crappy car." Tang Chocho shook her head strongly, "That guy's driving skills are too bad. Too bad. No way. On the contrary, that guy's driving skills are pretty good. Have you ever seen anyone drive a crappy car like that back and forth safely? That's true. Let's go watch that guy's race the day after tomorrow." Okay. Tang Chocho yawned, rolled up the quilt, and went back to sleep. Early the next morning, Sillin was gargling when he heard a sweet voice downstairs, "Mrs. Wentz." "Mrs. Wentz." Sillin spat out the mouthwash in his mouth and shook off the goosebumps on his body. What's wrong with that stupid cat again? When Sillin went downstairs, he saw that Mrs. Wentz was busy with her handiwork, and the stupid cat was squatting next to her, watching without blinking. Mrs. Wentz was indeed a person with many years of experience. A piece of cloth, a pile of fine sand, a needle, and a thread could quickly make a good thing. Now, a cat doll filled with fine sand was quickly formed in Mrs. Wentz's hands. It looked like Huimao, and even the cloth was gray. This kind of gray cloth was very common here, it was a low-quality cloth, and every family had a lot of it. In the past, Mrs. Wentz's handiwork was made of colorful or brightly colored cloth, because that kind of color could attract buyers. There were very few puppets made of gray cloth, and even if they were made, no one would buy them. But today, when Huimao came back from foraging, he happened to see Mrs. Wentz's handiwork. Suddenly, the cat had an idea. He pretended to be cute in front of Mrs. Wentz and asked her to help him make a cat doll. No wonder it was so sweet just now. But the doll looked really good. Although the cloth was coarse, it was very strong. Windy City also had a special kind of fine sand, which felt soft. The doll filled with fine sand was very three-dimensional, and it was made in a 1:1 ratio. Mrs. Wentz also very patiently hand-embroidered the eyes, mouth, and so on. It should be known that this kind of handmade doll was usually directly attached to an object to act as the eyes, or directly drawn. Compared to the machine sewing, it was much rougher. But this cat doll was obviously embroidered by Mrs. Wentz. Knowing that it was not easy for Mrs. Wentz, Cylin paid 100 star coins. Mrs. Wentz's other dolls only cost 10 star coins. Mrs. Wentz refused to accept the money, so Cylin directly put the money in the basket. Please accept it. This cat is very troublesome. Thank you for your patience. Mrs. Wentz smiled and waved her hand. No, it's very smart. It's the first time I've seen such a smart and talking cat. Mrs. Wentz took out a small cloth ball the size of a fist. It was filled with fine sand, and the outside was sewn with several layers of cloth. It would not hurt if hit. Mrs. Wentz gave the cloth ball to Hui Mao to play with. Hui Mao directly swept the ball with his tail, picked it up, and played with it directly with his tail. Mrs. Wentz applauded. In the past few days, the relationship between the upstairs and downstairs had obviously improved a lot. At first, Hui Mao often came downstairs to eat, but later, Mrs. Wentz directly let Cylin and Tang Qiuqiu eat downstairs, so that they would not have to cook separately. Cylin also did not eat for free. He took out some dried meat, and Tang Qiuqiu gave some candy to Mrs. Wentz, which was not sold here. As for the local food of the Wind City, Cylin and Tang Qiuqiu also tasted it. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the competition. The Sanchi flying car competition was based on a points system. First, there was a knockout round. Within a specified number of races, the top 10 would be able to enter the championship. Those who did not have enough points would have to wait for the next season. Only the top 5 of each race could get points. First place had 5 points, second place had 4 points, third place had 3 points, fourth place had 2 points, and fifth place had 1 point. On this day, Cylin and Tang Qiuqiu came to the grandstand area early. The tickets had been bought long ago. Cylin also bet part of it, and also helped Yudo's bet part of it. Udo, on the other hand, had more than 100,000 RMB in his bank account. It was a rare opportunity for him to meet a trustworthy person like Celine, so Udo gritted his teeth and took out 100,000 RMB. If he won this match, he would be able to triple the amount. Yudo's was more confident in himself, so this time he was really ready to go all out. The grandstand was circular with 2 entrances, one for the starting point and the other for the finishing point. The 2 entrances extended upwards in an inverted trapezoid shape. In the middle of the grandstand, there would be a huge holographic projection of the match, and the media would also broadcast the match live. Some people would wonder why so many people would buy expensive tickets to enter the grandstand, since it could be broadcast live, and they could only watch the projection from the grandstand. The first reason was the atmosphere. In the grandstand, the roars of the audience and the excitement could be contagious. The shouts echoed in the original grandstand, and it seemed that the whole stadium was about to shake. The loud roars brought up the atmosphere of the race. The surging blood caused by the speed and passion was incomparable to watching the live broadcast at home. The waving flags, the flashing screens, the fans hysterically shouting the names of their favorite racers, completely venting their emotions. As long as it was the audience standing in the grandstand, they would be infected by this atmosphere and could not help but roar. Tang Qiuqiu was obviously one of them. She held the loudspeaker and began shouting, "Yudo's, go!" Because she could not directly shout Yudo's name, that would bring trouble to Yudo's, who was a substitute. Yudo's had told Cylin about the flying car of the Che Xing he was substituting, so when the dazzling red flying car appeared, the atmosphere reached a climax. The Che Xing was quite popular. Of course, Che Xing's face and Yudo's face combined were the idols in the eyes of the audience. It should be known that in the grandstand, even if you wanted to speak, you had to use a loudspeaker. Otherwise, you would not be able to hear each other clearly in the crowd, so Tang Qiuqiu had been holding the loudspeaker the whole time. The funny thing was that there was also a big man shouting into a megaphone a few rows ahead of her. When he heard Tang Qiuqiu's shout, he turned around and asked, "Who's Yudaduo?" Tang Qiuqiu shouted with the loudspeaker, "Yudos is a real man." Silin was speechless. Someone at the side tugged at Tang Qiuqiu's sleeve, "Little girl, which car is Yudodo?" Tang Qiuqiu blinked. "I don't know, I just think it's fun to shout like this." Then, she started shouting again. What made Silin want to cry the most was that Huimao, who was on his shoulder, was holding the loudspeaker with both paws. When Tang Qiuqiu shouted, it also roared. Thus, such a sound was heard. A childish baby voice. Yudos. Then, there was a strange cat's cry. Meow. Then, there was the baby voice. Pure man. Then, there was the cat's cry. Meow, and so on. As he roared, Silin noticed that more and more people around him had joined his camp. For a time, the sounds of Yudodo, real men, and people who looked like they had been possessed by a cat demon filled the air. When someone heard this, he asked the person next to him, "Who is Yudos?" "Fuck, how would I know?" "Then why are you shouting? Didn't you hear it? It's fun to shout like this." Why did so many people join in? First, they didn't see the name Yudos in the contestants list. Therefore, based on the cat's cry at the end, they naturally thought that Yudos was a modal particle in a certain sector language. Second, this pure man was too versatile. Anyone could shout it. Third, the strange and cathartic cat's cry was very suitable for venting one's emotions. Therefore, Tang Qiuqiu and Huimao's roars became widespread. Inside the flying car, Yudos was sweating profusely. When he heard Tang Qiuqiu and Huimao's strange roars, he was still thinking, who taught these people? Then, as the majority of the people joined in, Yudos felt the urge to cry. From the number of people on Tang Qiuqiu's side to 1/10 of the audience, then 1/3 of the audience, and in the end, people from all over the grandstand were joining in. Moreover, they were shouting in unison with a rhythm. Other people might not know what Yudos meant, but Yudos himself did. This was the first time so many people were shouting him. Even if these people didn't know that Yudos was referring to his substitute hiding in the dark, even if they couldn't shout out his full name, it was enough. Yudos was satisfied. The wind grew stronger, and sand flew everywhere. Very good. Yudos closed his eyes and felt the slightest movement of the car in the wind. Beep, a long whistling sound rang out. More than 50 flying cars took their respective positions at the starting line, arranged from bottom to top according to the distribution of the spaces drawn before the race. Bam! A hurried explosive sound officially set off this wave. Amidst the screams of the audience, the flying cars scrambled to fly out of the starting line. The ancient earth, the young wind, the soaring passion, the hot blood and sweat, listening to the cheers of the audience, set sail, like a warrior fighting for his life. In the sandstone region, there were rows upon rows of sand dunes, disorderly mountain rocks, and unbridled sandstorms. Under such circumstances, the fiery red flying car was like a leader, advancing forward with an indomitable momentum and flying forward at a rapid speed. Was he chasing the wind, or was the wind chasing him? The car seemed to melt into the wind, even flipping with the wind, but it could always neatly avoid the obstacles. Yudo's shining point was his ability to predict and judge. Although he didn't have the ability to drive a high-end flying car, he always drove that old, worn-out car that seemed to be on the verge of death to dance with the wind. That way, he became more and more proficient in controlling the wind. The worn-out car couldn't automatically balance the airflow like an official racing car, so the driver had to drive, control, and judge. Because of this, Yudos understood the temperament of the wind better. He used the wind to complete difficult maneuvers, and he could also predict the obstacles and make decisions in advance. Because he could always make decisions before the other racers, many times, if they encountered a difficult situation, many racers would refer to the movements of the red flying car driven by Yudos. Bang! A racer miscalculated the height of the stone eaves, and the car scraped against the stone eaves. The flying car flipped a few times in the air and fell into a sand dune. The other racers wouldn't stop because of this unlucky fellow, even if the person who fell into the sand dune was on the verge of death. The spectators in the stands wouldn't sympathize. They would only pay attention to the other cars still in the race. The media wouldn't give the eliminated cars a shot, because they were losers. The projection in the center of the grandstand was divided into 3 parts. The best view was reserved for the cars running at the front, and the worst view was for the cars at the back. In the best view, the fiery red flying car outshone the others, leaving the cars behind it farther and farther behind. The driver of the car in second place had originally wanted to refer to Yudo's reaction, but he couldn't reach Yudo's skill. He couldn't use the wind to flip and pull out a super maneuver like Yudo's could. The red silhouette of the car was like a stroke of genius. In that narrow passageway, it almost followed the perfect center line, passing through the abnormally difficult corners at high speed. The grandstand was completely abuzz. Chapter 156. It was obvious who was better and who was worse. Some people in the stands were shouting the name of Che Xing, who was replaced by Yudos, and waving the floating image of Che Xing. Some so-called experts were commenting on the scene just now, and they were full of praise for Che Xing. The racers in the race were unaware of all this. They only knew that they had to focus all their attention on the race, because the slightest bit of carelessness would result in their deaths. The sandstone circuit was almost over, and the next circuit was Lake Chilian. As usual, the red flying car was the first to plunge into the lake. The underwater monitors recorded the race's situation accurately under the lake. Some media outlets also had workstations under the water, analyzing and reporting the race's situation in more detail. Although there was no wind or sand in the lake, factors such as resistance, buoyancy, and water pressure would affect the flying car's speed, and they also had to ensure that the car's oxygen supply system wasn't damaged. In every circuit, the racers had to consider the problem from different angles and adopt different responses. "Look, a water monster," a child shouted, pointing at a long anaconda that looked like a long anaconda. Yes, the lake wasn't just filled with clingy aquatic plants, there were also all kinds of creatures living in the lake. If one was careless and got entangled, it wouldn't be easy to get rid of them. In the worst-case scenario, one might even become food for these aquatic creatures. However, the racers were clearly used to this, and only a few were plotted against or made small mistakes and ran into trouble. Yudos was still in the lead. Outside, he could rely on the wind to make judgments, and in the water, he could use the flow of water. The water of Lake Chilian wasn't completely still, and the aquatic creatures and flying cars could cause quite a bit of movement. There were also passages connecting the lakes, where the flow of water was faster, and all of this could be used well. Many people couldn't imagine how the racer in the red flying car could do this, just as they couldn't imagine that the person driving the flying car was actually a 17-year-old boy who had been banished to the edge of the city and only relied on an old, broken car to train. Day after day, he trained harshly to live up to his own talent. He used all the external forces he could use to create more miracles. The critics looked at the time. In the previous records, the shortest time to complete the sandstone region was 5 hours and 21 minutes, but Yudos did not even use 5 hours. He was 20 minutes shorter than the record holder. Even a second would make people go crazy, let alone 20 minutes. Now, everyone was waiting for him to break the second record. And the result was not disappointing. He finished the Chilian Lake stage in 16 minutes less than the record. When the car emerged from the lake, people even thought that the red flying car would directly fly into the sky, and no external force could stop it. The third segment, Stone Forest. The wind in the stone forest wasn't much better than in the sandstone area. Perhaps it wouldn't be as fierce as the sandstone area, but it definitely wouldn't be any less strange than the sandstone area. The undirected wind could even blow from somewhere in the stone forest when you weren't paying attention, affecting the balance of the car and causing it to crash or fall. It made sense that inexperienced players weren't suited for Acerella's game. Because that was no different from asking for death. The red car contrasted sharply with the white stone forest. In this last segment, it was almost the red flying car's solo performance. The cars behind had been left far behind. On the 3 projections in the center of the grandstand, the red figure was the only one with the best angle. It was like the soul of an era. Flipping through the stone forest, it seemed like he couldn't find his balance. Every time the audience thought he would crash, they saw him successfully dodge the stone pillar in the next second. The distance between the car and the stone pillar was perhaps only a few centimeters. Even as spectators, people felt unusually nervous. Many people's foreheads were sweating, not from fear, but from excitement. Later, many people could see that the driver of the car seemed to be in a difficult situation, but in fact, he was doing it with ease. The cheers grew louder and louder. The Storm team had already begun to promote the car star, selling souvenirs. All the big images were of the car star. Compared to the bright and dazzling car star, the body double looked incomparably sad. Tang Qiuqiu wasn't as excited as before. She felt that Yudo's was very pitiful. Because the 2 segments were on the same latitude, after 1 lap, they would return to the grandstand, which was both the start and the finish line. When the red flying car crossed the finish line and entered the grandstand, the audience erupted. They stood up and shouted Che Xing's name. The flying car entered Storm's special workshop. Yudos got out of the car and gave his seat to the car star, who was already fully equipped. Ignoring the director's nonsense, "Good job, I'll give you a raise." He changed out of his jacket, put on casual clothes in the changing room, threw away the clothes that didn't belong to him, and walked out of the race. The race continued to heat up. The crazy fans' cheers could be heard from afar. Letting out a long breath, Yudos raised his head and walked away. But when he saw the debit card in Silen's hand, Yudo's gloomy mood improved a lot. Silen waved his hand. "Today's harvest is not bad. Go and transfer the money." "Okay." Yudos moved his arms to relax his tense muscles. "Yudodo, you won a lot of money this time," Tang Qiuqiu said with a smile. This time, she also invested some of the money she earned from completing the mission, and the harvest was very surprising. 300,000, it's enough for me to run many races. Yudos sighed. "No, you underestimated it by an order of magnitude." Yudo's movement froze. He turned around stiffly and looked at Silen. "Didn't you bet on that car to win?" "Yes, but I also bet on that car to break the record," Silen said with a smile. That means. Yudos swallowed his saliva. He was so nervous that he almost bit his tongue. He wasn't this nervous even during the race. "That means, it increased by 30 times. Tang Qiuqiu gave the answer directly. 30 times, in other words, the final amount of money was 3 million. Yudos panted heavily for a long time. Then, he suddenly squatted down on the spot and began to cry. Silen, Tang Qiuqiu, and Huimao, Silen knew that they couldn't understand Yudo's feelings. All the grievances, all the unwillingness, all the unreachable dreams the day before, when he had almost sunk into numbness and darkness, he found that there was actually sunshine on his back, a hope that he could touch just by turning around. Even when he crashed into a mountain rock and was seriously injured and almost killed, Yudos didn't cry. At this moment, he suddenly felt that everything was worth it. There was no reputation, no trophy that belonged to him, all his efforts were brushed off by some nonsense from the team leader, so what? After crying, Yudos raised his arm and used his sleeve to wipe his snot and tears. "It's my treat today. Don't fight with me." "Of course," Huimao said in a matter-of-fact tone. Yudos smiled like a fool all the way as he followed Silen to the center of Windy City. There, Sillin transferred Yudo's portion to him. Because it was through Sillin, even if the officials checked Yudo's account, they wouldn't find out that he gambled. This was something that Yudo's was sure of. Yudo's stared at Card for a long time as if he was staring at a lover. No, it was more like staring at a lover. When he came back to his senses, he still had a smile on his face. Suddenly remembering something, Yudo scratched his head and said to Sillin, "It's still early. I'll bring you guys to a good place tonight. But before that, I have to visit someone." "Oh right, maybe I can introduce you guys to him. He's a pharmacist." "Pharmacist?" Sillin asked curiously. "Yes, he's an amazing pharmacist." Yudo's face was full of admiration. "Let's go too. Let's see the amazing pharmacist you mentioned." Sillin was very interested in the person Yudo's mentioned. Sillin and the other two followed Yudo's to the other side of the city. It was an inconspicuous house that was on the outskirts of the central area. Compared to the many alloy building materials in the central area, this house was the same as Yudo's house. It was made of stone, but it was much bigger than Yudo's house. After Yudo's pressed the doorbell, the door to the yard opened automatically. There were some unknown flowers in the yard, and some medicinal herbs were exposed to the sun on the platform. Celine's footsteps paused when she stepped into the courtyard. Her eyes were filled with deep thought as she looked at the house. This place was full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Tang Kukikyu wrinkled her nose. What a strong smell of alcohol. After walking into the house, there were empty bottles everywhere. This made Tang Kukikyu frown even more. "Brother Lycrabe, sorry to disturb you," Yudo said. Creak, the door opened. A man in his 30s wearing a nightgown that hadn't been washed for a few days appeared. His eyes were half open, and his hair was messy. Coupled with the dispirited stubble, he looked like a drunkard in dire straits. At this time, this drunkard was leaning against the door, holding a bottle of wine in one hand. After drinking a mouthful of wine, he looked at the people who walked in. However, when his eyes swept over Sillin, his pupils constricted slightly. "Neurotoxin?" Lycrabe's voice was low and hoarse because he hadn't spoken for a few days, but it was very certain. "Enhancement drug?" Sillin looked at Lycrabe. "Good eye. Same to you." Yudo's didn't know what the conversation between Sillin and Lycrabe meant, but Hui Mao knew. Sillin had a dagger on him, and the dagger was smeared with neurotoxin. Riculab's body also carried the scent of a potion, a type of strengthening potion. Whether it was the neurotoxin on Sillin or the enhancement drug on Lycrabe, they were all made by themselves and had never been announced. However, when both sides met for the first time, they were able to detect the drug on each other and identify the effects of the drug. Even some professionals might not be able to do that. Twitching the corner of his mouth, Lycrabe turned his gaze to Yudo's. Yudo seemed a little nervous. He handed the 10,000 star coins worth of wine to Lycrabe. "Thank you for your help all this time." Lycrabe didn't have the slightest bit of courtesy. He took the bottle and looked at it. "Yo, you made money from the competition?" "Ahem, yeah." Yudo's continued to scratch his head and said embarrassedly. He believed that Lycrabe wouldn't sell him out, but it wasn't easy to say it out loud. Lycrabe didn't have the intention to continue asking. He waved his hand. "All right, I'll accept the wine. You can go now. I still need to continue sleeping." Lycrabe yawned as he said this. He took the wine bottle and walked into the room. "Brother Lycrabe, are you going to dance night tonight?" What answered Yudo's was the sound of the door slamming shut. However, Yudo's didn't care. Instead, he smiled and led Sillin and the others out. "That's a drunkard." After leaving the room, Tang Chiochio said with certainty. "Brother Lycrabe just likes to drink, but he's still a good person. At least he doesn't look down on us locals." "He's not from planet Acerella?" Sillin asked. "No, he came here more than 10 years ago. He'll lend money to the poor." Although he charges interest, it's not high. He's also very humane. He'll buy medicine on credit, unlike the hospitals in the city who always have to check the money first. Also, when my mother and I were drunk, Brother Lycrabe helped us. Once, my mother was seriously ill. At that time, my skills weren't that good. Life was hard and I didn't have the money to see a doctor. It was Brother Lycrabe who helped us. It seems that the drunkard uncle is a good person. Eudos smiled mysteriously. The place I'll take you to tonight, you'll be surprised. Tisk, you're still keeping us in suspense. Tang Chiochio curled her lips. I suddenly remembered that that place isn't suitable for children. Eudos said with a bitter face. Tang Chiochio glared at him. I want to go. In the end, he couldn't bear Tang Chiochio's angry stare. When night fell, Eudos took Silin and the other two to a place in the center of the city, Dance Night. Dance Night was a nightclub, a place for people to entertain. It was always overcrowded. People who came here for the first time would be a little timid, like aliens who barged in recklessly. The entire place was filled with an unparalleled madness and ambiguity. It was definitely not a quiet place, nor was it a place for people to drink. Coming to Dance Night, it seemed that something had to happen for people to be satisfied. If it wasn't an animal with strong heart and lung function, or an animal that could only dance with the help of drugs, it was best not to come here. Walking into Dance Night, the evil aura that hit them in the face made them fall into a trance for a moment. Inside, the booths were mixed with the dance floor, making it convenient for guests to fantasize about the twisting dancers on the dance floor at a close distance. It also made it convenient for people to freely play when they were drunk. Inside, as far as the eye could see, everyone was gorgeously dressed. Here, no matter how bright, sharp, or exaggerated one's appearance was, it wouldn't attract too much attention. There were a lot of handsome men and beautiful women in every small circle, dazzling the eyes. People who liked excitement or those who wanted to vent could sway on the dance floor to their heart's content, wantonly twisting. The extreme craziness was even greater than the craziness of the car fans in the grandstand. Among the ear-piercing explosive music, most of them came from the many races outside of planet Acerella. People dressed in strange clothes twisted their bodies, it was really a group of demons dancing. Some young women even wore leopard fur, sexy with a little bit of playfulness and cuteness. Every one of them made people want to make mistakes. Depression could only turn into complaints or roars, and only the vast space could accommodate roars. The spacious venue made the people who came here roar wildly, dragging out their voices as if they were possessed. The venue played the essence of various races and cultures, with an aphrodisiac energy, like a spell that would sweep you into a psychedelic tide, turning you into an irrational animal. Therefore, under the influence of the music and alcohol, everyone's eyes turned red as they greedily scanned everything in the venue. Then, they twisted their bodies and scuttled through the crowd, they were playing a simple game of pray and pray. In such an environment, it was almost impossible to sit down and drink quietly. Different styles of music at different times, a passionate and unrestrained music feast, fully provoking one's passion. Whether it was blues, sensational, dynamic, psychedelic, or passionate, all challenged one's ears and self-control. There was also a slightly quieter place in Dance Night. It had a retro style, a soft and comfortable long sofa, and psychedelic incense. When people finished hunting on the dance floor, they would come here to enjoy their prey. Thus, leisurely music reverberated in the ears, pure wine, and tempting desserts were sprinkled on the long, lazy sofa. Your body, your prey, couldn't help but become restless. The story about this psychedelic place was both simple and wonderful. It was a place of debauchery and debauchery, a night of music, and a night of sensual pleasures. It was so wonderful that people couldn't stop. Whether it was good or bad, from this narrow and crazy world, it would make you feel as if you had gotten everything you wanted, and it would also force out the magic in your bones, turning you into an animal that constantly pursued excitement and primitive desires, making you feel that you were born for the nightlife, and you couldn't wait to get more drunk. Sillin and the others found a small private room on a high floor a little farther away from the dance floor. The transparent partition allowed them to see the scene on the dance floor outside, and they could hear the music clearly enough. Tang Qiuqiu didn't like it here, and always felt awkward. Sillin didn't let him see the scene outside, and ordered some desserts for Tang Qiuqiu, and Tang Qiuqiu was also happy to do so. Looking at the crazy people on the dance floor outside, the people dancing to cater to each other, and the people kissing wantonly, Sillin sighed, I really shouldn't have brought Tang Qiuqiu here. However, just when Tang Qiuqiu was sleepy after eating the desserts, the light in the room suddenly blurred, and then the whole dance floor showed a kind of suppressed excitement and forbearance. Then, with a bang, it was completely boiling. At that moment, the lights were moving, the music was moving, and every part of every area was moving. The whole visual effect was like a feast of the rich. The lights crisscrossed on a point, and there stood a person, with a flamboyant and reserved look, and at the same time, they all blended into this demonic place. If a love song and a bouquet of flowers could conquer a woman, then for this person, he could conquer a dozen with just one move. Along with the music, under the illumination of the lights, he walked rhythmically, mixed a glass of wine for himself, drank it in one gulp, put down the glass without hesitation, and stepped into the dance floor step by step, like a king descending. The people on the dance floor spontaneously made a way for him, giving the Wolf King of the Dance Night his stage. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.